American Comics. My Warhammer Simulator Chapter 541 to 560. Not long after, wielding the Empathy Nullifier Scepter, you and Fulgrim embarked on a destructive rescue operation within the vast tomb world. Using the area map you had memorized, you led Fulgrim ahead of the countless Necrons before they could react. You successfully entered a collection area composed of an Orc warboss and a Deathwatch squad. CHH. With Fulgrim's Blood Reaver scythe dancing back and forth in his palm, the stasis field generator used to imprison the Deathwatch squad was instantly destroyed. The next moment, before you could tell the 5 Astartes who had just regained their mobility the truth. 3 of them immediately activated their power armor and stepped forward, forcefully inserting their melee weapons into the Orc warboss's towering body and severing his entire head. Combat squad from the Deathwatch reports to both Primarchs. The other 2 Astartes clad in black power armor merely glanced at you and Fulgrim before kneeling on one knee without hesitation, offering their loyal greetings. As the other 3 also knelt on one knee in the Orc warboss's blood puddle. Narrowing your eyes, you suddenly noticed that the emotional fluctuations emanating from one of the Astartes were noticeably more excited and melancholic. As a loyalist son of the Emperor, to see my Gene father on the battlefield once more, I have no regrets even in death. The Astartes, who had chosen to become a Deathwatch Black Shield, slightly raised his black helmet, his lenses staring intently in Fulgrim's direction, and said in a deep voice. At this moment, Fulgrim, a hint of surprise and sorrow flickering in his purple eyes, slowly activated his power armor and stepped forward. Without any hesitation, he knelt on one knee towards the Deathwatch Black Shield who claimed to be a son of the Emperor, placing a massive ceramite hand heavily on the other's shoulder pad. I am not a worthy Primarch, nor a competent father. I owe all my Gene sons a blood debt that is impossible to repay. Now, the situation is dire. Are you willing to fight by my side once more? Fulgrim, his expression stern, said to the other party in a solemn tone. Sons of the Emperor, slayers of the Father's enemies. The Deathwatch Black Shield, who had fully revealed his true identity, roared out the Legion battle cry that had been buried for so long. As for the rest of the Deathwatch, needless to say, they quickly reorganized their weapons and equipment, becoming your and Fulgrim's first combat squad. Over the next period of time, you explained the current situation and the upcoming plan to the Deathwatch squad. And with the Deathwatch's advice, you and Fulgrim also learned which aliens could barely be communicated with and which ones shouldn't even be attempted to be released. Soon after, once again passing through the Necron blockade, you successfully destroyed a large number of stasis field generators and reached a basic agreement of coexistence and cooperation with a large group of greenskins led by an Orc meekboss. You stared at the greenskin orcs who were howling and charging towards the Necrons, immediately leading the entire team to take action elsewhere. This group of greenskin orcs would buy you a lot of time to liberate more collectibles. Boom boom boom, you forcefully brandished the Empathy Nullifier Scepter in your palm, blasting away countless Necrons within your field of vision, whose numbers were simply impossible to count. The buzzing metal 10 rings also rotated back and forth around you like a spiral storm, tearing apart a large number of metal bodies. At the same time, Fulgrim, wielding the Blood Reaver scythe into circles of green light, was leading the Deathwatch to destroy the stasis field generators. A considerable number of Ultramarines were waiting for your rapid release. Courage and honor. Shortly after, a battle cry that resounded across most of the battlefield suddenly reached your ears. You knew without looking back that Fulgrim's operation was a success. You immediately activated your vibranium power armor, wielding the Empathy Nullifier Scepter, and began to converge towards the direction where everyone was. Buzz buzz buzz. At this moment, a Necron-heavy unit composed of 6 armed Deathmark destroyers and numerous flayed ones appeared on the battlefield. In an instant, streams of green light and a dense barrage of firepower, like a rainstorm, poured down in your direction. Many Ultramarines who had just broken free from the stasis field were instantly pierced through their power armor, becoming sacrifices on the fierce battlefield. Fulgrim, take them away. Go find the heavy weapons units. I'll cover the rear. You took a deep breath, not turning your head back, and reversed the direction of your charge. The Empathy Nullifier Scepter, tightly gripped in your palm, was completely wielded into an impenetrable green barrier, countless Necron warriors being blasted into the air like rag dolls. Boom! You, who were forcefully activating your vibranium power armor, collided head-on with a flayed one. Before the opponent's phase blade could crash down, the Empathy Nullifier Scepter had already heavily struck the opponent's metal skull. Immediately after, not caring about the results of the battle, you quickly used Shadow Step, narrowly dodging the terrifying blades of several phase blades. After all, against the Necrons, melee weapons, your vibranium power armor was no different from ordinary power armor. Rumble rumble, accompanied by a deafening roar, your magnetically sealed boots heavily landed on the ground as you suddenly and forcefully swept out, instantly knocking away the flayed ones that had just surrounded you, as well as the 6-armed Deathmark destroyers that were trying to engulf you with Gauss fire. However, seeing more Necron warriors continuously surrounding you like opportunists, your mind racing, you unhesitatingly took out a melt-a-bomb from the back of your power pack. After casually activating it, you immediately threw it at the position under your feet, and then, without any hesitation, you successively used Shadow Step, speeding away in the direction away from this place. Rumble rumble, accompanied by the sudden bright light and the violently erupting rolling heat waves, all Necron units within a radius of dozens of meters were completely turned into a large area of melting metal liquid. You, whose magnetically sealed boots heavily landed, turned back to stare at the terrifying scene like a sea of fire. You subconsciously tightened your grip on the Empathy Nullifier Scepter, and once again activated your vibranium power armor, continuing to fight your way towards the direction where the others had just retreated. Thank you for your support. Open black lens bracket boom boom boom, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. 2 Contemptor dreadnoughts from the Ultramarines are continuously attacking a tomb obelisk that is constantly releasing Gauss arcs. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Many Ultramarines wielding bolters are hiding behind metal barricades, accurately firing at numerous Necron warriors revealing their metallic bodies. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. These Astartes veterans from the Horus Heresy era have almost unhesitatingly become your and Fulgrim's most powerful heavy combat force. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. At this moment, the area you are attacking contains a small number of Astartes from the Salamanders chapter. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. However, Trazyn, who is constantly directing a large number of Necrons to encircle and intercept you, has gradually realized the purpose of your actions. He has begun to mobilize more Necron units to defend those important areas where the Imperium's combat forces are stored. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. This undoubtedly brings considerable trouble to you and Fulgrim, but you seem to have no choice at the moment. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. As time passes, one tomb obelisk after another, functioning as sentry towers, is successfully destroyed by the 2 Contemptor dreadnoughts. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Many Ultramarines quickly drive their power armor forward, beginning to destroy the stasis fields imprisoning the Salamanders Astartes. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Soon after, only 10 Salamanders Astartes become members of your team. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. At this moment, more Necron forces arrive, drawn by the sound, and you have to immediately carry out a strategic shift. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Once again, you cross the Necron encirclement and successfully enter a simulated battlefield meticulously constructed by Trazyn, but not yet completed. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. And on this battlefield, a large contingent of the Vestroyan Firstborn is displaying an intense offensive formation, undergoing time loops again and again. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. With the help of the Salamanders Astartes, you and Fulgrim completely destroy the time loop devices around the battlefield, releasing the somewhat bewildered mortal warriors. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Almost immediately, all of you obtain food supplies carried by the Firstborn. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. As Primarchs, you and Fulgrim devour any food you can get your hands on, attracting the silent attention of countless Astartes, and even many mortal warriors are dumbfounded. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Soon after, you and Fulgrim, along with the Ultramarines and Salamanders Astartes, begin discussing the next steps of the plan. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. At the same time, you begin to use your memory to draw the maps and Necron writing you memorized earlier in front of everyone. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. And just as everyone is arguing about the next steps of the plan. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. A dark-skinned, always silent Salamanders Astartes suddenly steps forward, cautiously walking to your side. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Primarch, I can barely recognize some of the Necron writing, And I have also discovered some more important clues on these maps, he says to you in a low voice. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. Hearing his words, you immediately stop what you are doing. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. Under the careful identification of this knowledgeable salamander's Astartes, an area called the world engine becomes the focus of your discussion. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. Finally, after discussing with Fulgrim, you decide to launch an attack on this place. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. After all, as time passes, your efforts to release more imprisoned personnel become increasingly difficult, and you must change your combat strategy. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. And that is probably one of the most important places in the entire tomb world. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. Whether occupied or destroyed, it could cause great harm to Trazyn himself and countless Necrons. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. Once the target is determined, the mortal warriors, including the Firstborn, quickly reorganize their equipment and weapons. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. With the help of the Salamander's Astartes, you successfully start 5 Leman Russ tanks without any problems. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. You have to admire Trazyn's perfectionist style, otherwise you would not be able to obtain these heavy combat vehicles now. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. Soon after, with 5 Leman Russ tanks and Contemptor dreadnoughts as the vanguard, and the mortal warriors and Astartes of the Firstborn as fire support, all of you quickly launch a continuous assault on the Necron encirclement. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. Perhaps Trazyn is somewhat surprised by your battle plan of retracing your steps, unable to figure out your intentions and details, which has led to some obvious hesitation in the deployment of many Necron forces. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. Taking advantage of this opportunity, you and Fulgrim lead the Astartes and mortal warriors to charge straight towards the world engine. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. Along the way, you even re-enter the architectural complex composed of Eldar buildings. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. Before long, you encounter the Eldar Harlequins who are fighting the Black Legion Terminators once again. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. The next second, you and Fulgrim lead the Astartes to launch a terrifying purge of the traitors without any hesitation. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. Boom boom boom, close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. Countless bolter flashes and scorching lasers fly back and forth, and the heavy tracks of Leman Russ tanks crash into the Black Legion Terminators. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. After you use the empathy nullifier in your palm to blast off the head of the last Chaos Astartes. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. A dozen agile Eldar Harlequins remain vigilant, slowly stepping forward. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. Primarch of humanity, this time you have finally understood our words. At this moment, an Eldar Harlequin, who is clearly the leader, says to you in a calm tone. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. If you guys had spoken human language earlier, maybe we could have acted sooner. You say to the Eldar Harlequin without any politeness. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. Sooner or later would have missed the opportunity, now is just right. May I ask, the world engine? The masked Eldar Harlequin does not show any extra emotional fluctuations, and suddenly continues to ask you. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. That's right, the world engine. What exactly is that place? The core area of the tomb world. You take a deep breath and reply to the other party. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. However, the Eldar Harlequin does not directly answer your question. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. He only says that when you successfully break into that place, you will understand what to do. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. Primarch of humanity, try to seize the fleeting opportunity. If all goes well, this will be your only bargaining chip to victory. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. Speak human language. You stare at the other party and say coldly. Close black lens bracket, open black lens bracket. Actually, even we don't know what the world engine represents, we just guess that it is extremely important to the Necron overlord Trazyn. Close black lens bracket. Thank you for your support. These Xenos Harlequins, who barely speak a coherent language, have successfully joined the Imperial forces that you and Fulgrim painstakingly assembled. Fulgrim didn't object much, though the few black-skinned space marines from the Salamanders chapter occasionally cast dubious glances at the Harlequins. Your next course of action is to launch continuous attacks and charges to avoid being surrounded by the overwhelming Necron forces. Soon, even with you and Fulgrim, both Primarchs, fighting at 200% of your combat and command capabilities. The casualties among the human auxilia had reached nearly half, and even the Astartes of the Ultramarines chapter, who numbered the most, had suffered over a third in losses. Even the initial Deathwatch kill team was reduced to the single, incognito son of the Emperor, the rest of the team having fallen in the advance. At this moment, you, desperately swinging the empathy nullifier, were completely bloodied, the buzzing metal rings never ceasing their impacts, tearing apart the Necron-heavy units. Several Astartes from the Salamanders chapter swung their heavy power hammers and power swords back and forth, shouldering more of the defensive fire and assault duties for the human auxilia behind them. Meanwhile, Fulgrim, his purple-gold power armor already battered and ruined, wielded the Bloodreaper in his palm, turning it into whirling green afterimages. His blood-red hair flying wildly, he did everything he could to carve a path of survival for everyone through the tide of metal undead. The sole surviving son of the Emperor followed closely behind his Gene Father at all times, leading more Ultramarines in an incredibly difficult charge towards the Necrons ahead. Just then, a Contemptor dreadnought, having taken dozens of Gauss cannon blasts head-on, was steadily pushed backward, large amounts of ceramite armor and adamantium plating silently dissipating into rising green particles. But this Astartes dreadnought, clinging to life, activated the war machine on the verge of evaporation and collapse one last time, charging like a terrifying iron train into the deepest part of the Necron encirclement. Courage and honor, accompanied by a blurred and low battle cry of terror. The Contemptor dreadnought, heavily surrounded by countless Necron-heavy units, overloaded the power source within its massive frame without hesitation, a thermal reactor core. Rumble, in an instant, the blinding flash of the explosion and the violent shockwave forced you to close your eyes. You barely managed to stop your vibranium power armor from tumbling backward by forcefully planting the empathy nullifier into the ground below. When you quickly opened your eyes, you immediately noticed that the Necrons within a radius of several kilometers in front of you were mostly overturned and thrown about, temporarily losing their lethal threat. You instantly activated your vibranium power armor, then, without looking back, shouted loudly to the Imperial forces behind you, who had also suffered a considerable impact. The world engine is close at hand, and our victory is within reach. Any Leman Russ tanks and Contemptor dreadnoughts still mobile, advance immediately. All Astartes, charge with me. Clear the way for the human auxilia. As soon as you finished speaking, large numbers of Ultramarines who had just recovered and the remaining Salamanders Astartes quickly gathered behind you. Fulgrim, forcefully raising the Bloodreaper, fully consolidated the remaining humans of his legion and led his only Gene son quickly to your side. Your gaze first lingered on your Primarch brother, who looked slightly disheveled. Then you turned your head and scanned the Astartes, their power armor almost completely scarred, without any complaints. Finally, your eyes moved past the greatly reduced human auxilia and landed on the remaining 6 or 7 Harlequins. At this moment, the Harlequin leader did not speak to you. He simply shook his head slightly, as if encouraging your next actions. For the Emperor, you slowly took a deep breath, the thousands of words gradually rising in your heart finally converging into a simple and clear battle cry that echoed through the surrounding space. For the Emperor, the next moment, you and Fulgrim, with fierce expressions, took the lead, once again wielding the melee weapons in your palms. Accompanied by countless roars, you relaunched an attack against the gradually reviving Necrons. As time went on, almost the entire human force of the Emperor's children was wiped out, and after several Leman Russ tanks were completely scrapped, only a few hundred people could now keep up with your pace. Even the number of Ultramarines Astartes was reduced to only about half. The last Contemptor dreadnought elder chose the rearguard mission, and it is estimated that he has already met a tragic end, and only one Salamander's Astartes survived. The only son of the Emperor lost an arm to cover Fulgrim, and the severely injured one could barely keep up with his Gene Father's combat charge. As for the Harlequins, in order to help everyone deal with the Necron aerial units suddenly dispatched by Trazyn, only the Harlequin leader is barely alive. And the entire allied force paid such a heavy price for the attack, which allowed you to successfully enter the location of the world engine. The next moment, you and Fulgrim, with numb expressions, exchanged a glance. You immediately ordered the knowledgeable salamander and the Harlequin leader to go forward and inspect the cubic giant structure within everyone's line of sight. Soon after, the Harlequin, whose agile steps were noticeably light and scattered, and the salamanders Astartes rushed out of the building's interior one after another, returning to you and Fulgrim's presence. Wrong. We were really wrong. This shouldn't be. I can't believe the prophecy would actually. The Harlequin leader's distraught tone made your two hearts skip a beat. Immediately afterward, you, with a purple halo flickering behind you, immediately focused your cold gaze on the salamanders Astartes. Two Primarchs, I have never seen anything like it. This kind of knowledge is far beyond the limits of my thinking. You'd better go and see it for yourselves. The expression on the salamanders Astartes' dark face was also very solemn. You took a deep breath. You then chose to walk side by side with Fulgrim towards the cubic building ahead. As soon as you two stepped into the dimly lit interior, you merely raised your head and stared at the incredibly massive black mechanical device, and subconsciously let out an almost murmured sigh. That is, a stand shard. If you haven't mistaken it, that should be a shard of a star god that has become the core of the Necron world's energy supply. Looking at the entire galaxy, only the Necrons would use a star god shard as a battery. But what's even more despairing is that the star god shard can't help you leave this Necron world. In fact, if you destroy the confinement device, it will become an even more terrifying storm of destruction. Heh. At this moment, you suddenly chuckled, and even the extremely serious-looking Fulgrim beside you couldn't help but glance at you. I should have realized long ago that with Trazin's abilities and methods, obtaining a star god shard wouldn't be difficult, you muttered to yourself. The next moment, you narrowed your eyes and briefly explained the true origins of the star god shard to Fulgrim beside you. Fulgrim's expression became even more solemn as he once again learned about the power of the Necrons, completely refreshing his understanding of the Necron overlord Trazin. Buzz. Just then, with an inscrutable expression on your face, you suddenly raised a vibranium hand and quickly projected several metal rings with a purple glow behind you towards the outside of the cubic building. Soon after, the towering salamanders Astartes re-entered the interior of the building. Go and collect any activatable explosives from the Battle Brothers and Mortal Soldiers. Meltabombs are best, but if not, it doesn't matter. Your gaze fixed on the unknown star god shard in the distance, and without turning your head, you said to the salamanders Astartes. The dark-skinned brother from the salamanders seemed to have guessed your thoughts. With a solemn expression, he simply nodded heavily and walked outside without hesitation. Brother, are you planning? Fulgrim, with a slight frown, suddenly looked down at you and asked. Once this star god shard is freed from its restraints, it will definitely cause irreparable trouble for Trazin, but we, who are closest, will also face a catastrophe. I'm sorry, Brother Fulgrim, if my true self were here, perhaps there would still be a chance to lead you to escape completely, but unfortunately, this is just a replica copied from my true self. Perhaps, to some extent, the current me is no different from you. You slightly raised your neck, your tired gaze fixed on Fulgrim in front of you, and said in a deep voice. I understand and comprehend you, brother. You have done everything you could. In fact, if it weren't for you, I would most likely still be desperately pursuing that false hope in the time loop. And to allow me to die gloriously as a Primarch is better than becoming a puppet plaything in the hands of Chaos or the Necrons again. I am Fulgrim, son of the Emperor. I am still the proud phoenix of the Imperium, but I am also one of your blood brothers. Come, brother, let us embark on that path to endless glory. Perhaps one day, you and I will meet again under the Emperor's throne. At this moment, Fulgrim's crimson hair fluttered without wind, and he slowly revealed a handsome smile full of sincere emotion to you. He raised a huge ceramite hand and heavily patted your thick vibranium shoulder armor. Then, without hesitation, he activated his battered power armor and turned to walk outside the building. However, you, with narrowed eyes, stared at Fulgrim's tall figure gradually disappearing from your sight, and suddenly let out a long sigh. I'm sorry, brother, perhaps if handled properly, no one except me will have to die. Looking at the star god shard again, you activated your vibranium power armor and walked out of the building. You have already made the best choice for Fulgrim and everyone else without permission. Soon after, several remaining meltabombs and many high-explosive grenades were successfully installed by the salamanders Astartes throughout the massive building used to confine the star god shard. While fiddling with the only detonator in your palm, you stood side by side with Fulgrim, who had just finished his final pre-battle speech to everyone. The two of you fearlessly stared at the countless Necrons gradually surrounding this place. At this moment, Trazyn, who was mobilizing more Necron troops, seemed to know your current situation. Faced with this collection of rebels like trapped beasts, the originally furious Trazyn instead showed great patience. About tens of minutes later, the large Necron force that had heavily surrounded this place gradually dispersed, revealing a wide path leading directly to you. At the same time, the Necron overlord Trazyn, controlling a noticeably more powerful metal body, slowly walked towards you. Perhaps you think that destroying the confinement device of that Star God shard will bring even greater trouble to my Necron world. Then you human collectibles are too naive. Trazyn, with green light flashing in his eye sockets, slowly raised a metal hand towards you and Fulgrim. And in the center of his palm, a 12-sided cube with a faint metallic luster reflecting off its surface was slowly rotating in midair. You see, this is a control module of a hypercube maze that can instantly pull the entire Necron world into a time loop. A long time ago, I already completed the basic time node modification of the entire Necron world. Now, I only need to activate it slightly, and all your battles and sacrifices will completely disappear, even returning to a time node that even I don't know. So, your tenacious will or the countermeasures you rack your brains to come up with are completely meaningless to me. At this moment, Trazyn, who had completely revealed his true trump card, said lightly to all of you without reservation. After hearing his words, Fulgrim's originally solemn face suddenly became much uglier. Even those Astartes who had already resigned themselves to death subconsciously gripped the melee weapons in their palms. If the Necron overlord Trazyn's words did not contain any lies, then perhaps all of you would find even death to be a luxury. Tisk tisk, Trazyn, you're right. Compared to the technological level mastered by you Necrons, we humans look like a group of uncivilized barbaric insects. It's a pity that you Necrontyr were still tricked by the star gods to the point where your entire race was completely destroyed, weren't you? At this moment, you took a deep breath, suddenly activated your vibranium power armor, stepped forward, and stared in the direction of Trazyn with a suddenly brightened gaze, saying loudly, "Heh, young human Primarch, if you think you can use this level of topic and sarcasm to make me lose control before the battle, then you are mistaken. I am just a Necron overlord who likes to collect everything. As for the future of the race, I'm afraid only the Silent King and those old antiques would care more. What's more, the grudge between you and me is entirely personal. Who told you to steal my precious scepter?" Trazyn, with green light flashing in his eye sockets, said to you in a cold tone. "Oh, is that so? I think you may have misunderstood my meaning. I actually just want to give you Necrons a chance to regain your flesh." You shook your head slightly and slowly stopped. You narrowed your eyes and stared at the Necron overlord not far away, saying almost word by word in a deep voice, "Trazyn, I'm here to negotiate with you. Thank you all for your support." At this moment, you no longer possess any significant bargaining chips against Trazyn. Even choosing to release the stand shard is merely a psychological comfort in the face of utter despair. However, you, being from the future and from Earth, possess more than just one trump card. You first vaguely hinted at your true origins to Trazyn, and then told him about ultimate artifacts capable of destruction and creation, like the Infinity Stones. And when a suspicious Trazyn doubted that you were just bluffing him, you then showcased the metallic 10 rings you controlled and the vibranium, two metallic substances that never existed in the Warhammer universe. At the same time, Fulgrim, clutching the Blood Reaver in his hand, wanted to step forward and interrupt your heretical behavior several times, but the camaraderie of countless battles fought side by side and the trust in his brother made him choose to believe in your loyalty. In fact, you only told Trazyn some of the benefits, concealing many more of the drawbacks. As for whether he can truly obtain a body of flesh and blood, or whether he will instantly become a fish on a chopping board after obtaining a body of flesh and blood, that is another question worth discussing. Soon after, you proposed a deal to Trazyn filled with various restrictions. Trazyn could send an avatar into the new world at any time, but he must not disclose any relevant information to the Triarch Council of the Necrons without permission. And your corresponding condition was very simple: Fulgrim and all the Astartes and mortal warriors must regain their freedom. Only after they successfully leave the tomb world will you, as a hostage, personally hand over the empathic obliterator to him. However, the cunning Trazyn did not agree to your conditions so easily. He raised a metallic hand and waved it gently. All the Astartes, including Fulgrim, instantly straightened their backs with stiff movements, and a faint green light filled almost everyone's eyes. Quote, Scarab of imprisonment, you took a deep breath and abruptly turned your head to glare at Trazyn not far away. Young human, you should feel fortunate, because the ending I originally designed for you was to have this Primarch's replica personally pierce your heart, and to have those mortals who worship your Primarchs dig out every piece of flesh from your body. Only then could your disrespect and blasphemy in seizing the treasured staff be completely erased. Trazyn, with green light flashing in his eye sockets, commanded many Necron warriors to step forward and reload Fulgrim and the others into stasis fields. And after all the stasis fields were transported back to the depths of the Necron forces. You didn't show any signs of taking action, just subconsciously clenched the detonator in your palm. Don't worry, I, Trazyn, dare not say anything else, but my reputation seems to be pretty good. As long as you take one of my avatars to that new world, I will return the Primarch's replica to you. Perhaps, this is the best fate for this collectible. Your foolish human empire will not allow a Primarch's replica to wander around, and that evil true form that has fallen into chaos will not leave any hidden dangers. Now, let's talk about another deal. You return the empathic obliterator to me, and I will allow you to leave the tomb world alone. Trazyn's green light scanned you up and down, and he said to you in a condescending and arrogant tone. Heh. However, at this moment, you, with an indifferent expression, suddenly laughed, and the low laughter grew louder and louder. Ha, what are you laughing at? Trazyn, who subconsciously took a step back, slightly shook his metal head and asked you with great puzzlement. Because I suddenly remembered something happy. Trazyn, see you next time, don't forget the deal between us. You narrowed your eyes and stared at the other party, then slowly raised the detonator in your vibranium palm. Wait, don't be impulsive, we can still discuss. Trazyn, seemingly in a state of panic, couldn't help but shout loudly at you. Rumble. In an instant, accompanied by deafening explosions and fierce flames, the cubic buildings behind you collapsed one after another. In the next second, a wave of destructive power, like an invisible tide, immediately spread outwards. Your gaze fixed on the dumbfounded Necron overlord Trazyn, and a smile gradually appeared on the corner of your mouth. You stood there and gradually opened your arms, preparing to welcome the arrival of death. You're simply a madman. You are a. The other party's almost roaring words came to an abrupt end. The destructive power from the unknown star god almost instantly annihilated your tall body and Trazyn's powerful avatar. At this moment, your consciousness completely fell into darkness and began to dissipate. You are dead. Simulation ended, time unknown. The options available to retain from this simulation are as follows. 1. Trazyn's empathic obliterator. Note: this is a weapon belonging to the Necron Overlord, the galaxy's legendary master thief, the endless collector, the temporary collector and definer of unclaimed items, Trazyn the handyman. Note: the specific origin and manufacturing time of the empathic obliterator are unknown, but it is said to be one of the precious spoils of war that the Necrons seized from the Old Ones during the late stages of the War in Heaven. Note: the attack pattern of this staff seems to involve ancient technologies such as causality, which can inflict unavoidable damage on all targets by randomly striking an enemy. Note: what's yours is mine, and what's mine is still mine, Trazyn said. Note: oh, my precious staff. Trazyn, who had spent countless avatars and efforts to re-imprison the Stand Shard, carefully picked up the empathic obliterator from a pile of wreckage. 2. 5 standard pattern Leman Russ battle tanks covered in battle damage common. Note: the standard pattern Leman Russ battle tank is the most common heavy vehicle in the Astra Militarum, and a regular item on the supply lists of countless officers. Note: relying on its incredibly thick armor and the all-consuming engine system, the Leman Russ battle tank is not only an important force on the battlefield, but also represents a powerful declaration of war. Even just one Leman Russ tank appearing in the Astra Militarum ranks as enough to boost the morale of most soldiers. Note: want us to switch to Rogel Dorn tanks? Even Squigs wouldn't use that thing. A Leman Russ tank commander roared with a flushed face. 3. Sweat gland improvement organ, Fulgrim's Pride Primarch. Note: this small organ, made from the active cells of Fulgrim's replica, needs to be implanted in the lower part of the intestinal tissue. The hormones secreted and the modification of the sweat gland organs completely follow the initial process of the Primarch level. Note: it seems to have been strengthened and blessed by the Emperor. Note: It will not make any changes to your body until you successfully activate this small organ. Once activated, all the sweat secreted by your body will become a natural cleanser. If you enter an extreme or space environment without wearing a helmet, the large amount of this substance secreted will allow you to survive and fight for longer than Rabute Gilliman himself. Fulgrim himself seems to be unaware of this, so there are no blessings. If possible, don't let him know any information either. Note: right there. Don't stop, don't stop. This is the joyful low growl involuntarily emitted by the demon Fulgrim, who is currently copulating with Slanesh Greater Demon in Carry. Note: the Emperor himself is very busy now and cannot answer any prayers. If you need help, please press 1, and we will make the necessary transfer for you. This matter is the responsibility of the 22nd Primarch. At this moment, a cold sun sleeping in the deepest part of the warp slightly shook. Huff. Roexia suddenly opened his tightly closed eyes. At this moment, still in a hazy state, he subconsciously looked around. He found that the surroundings, dimly lit, only had the faint purple light emanating from the metal 10 rings. The next second, he slowly exhaled, and his whole body gradually relaxed. Subsequently, Roexia, who gradually woke up, leaned the vibranium power armor against the inside of the metal throne. He directly opened the simulator page and re-examined all the information and annotations on it. Well, Trazyn the Infinite, his tomb world does have a lot of good things, but the only pity is that this time I'm not going in person, otherwise how many ancient technological products could I bring back? Of course, if I go in person and can't come back, and become his collection, that's also a big problem. Tisk, what does a simulated body agreeing to Trazyn's conditions have to do with me personally? What if I don't fulfill the agreement? But if I can bring a replica of Fulgrim back to the home world, it wouldn't be a bad way to save the country by taking a roundabout route. Rather than letting him be corrupted by chaos again in the future, or die under the guns of the Imperium, it's better to struggle with me again in the home world. But how can I trick this Primarch brother away from Trazyn's hands? I need to plan carefully. After all, dealing with a Overlord stand-in or a large group of Necrons is not a concern. What I'm afraid of is being targeted by the Silent King or the Stormlord, those old bones who are trying to seek hope for the entire race. The home world is already chaotic enough, what if there is another terrifying force like the Necrons? But then again, if the home world encounters a super existence that I can't deal with by any means, maybe I can still use the Necrons as a last resort besides the Emperor. Moreover, all of this presupposes that the Emperor will not personally manifest and give me a few psychic slaps. At this moment, Roexia, squinting, had countless thoughts flying around in his mind. He shook his head slightly, focusing his attention on the rewards of this simulation. To be honest, judging only from the value of the rewards. This time, Roexia wanted to choose the empathic obliterator more. Unfortunately, the enhancement surgery is an important part of his continued enhancement of combat power. In judging from the current situation, it seems indispensable. So, Roexia, shaking his head and sighing, unhesitatingly chose Fulgrim's sweat gland improvement organ. Immediately afterwards, he keenly felt bursts of flesh and blood growth stinging from deep in his abdomen. And about a few tens of seconds later, all the stinging pains completely disappeared. Roexia, frowning slightly, raised a vibranium palm and touched the exposed areas such as his cheeks and neck, but he never found any special signs. Well, it really needs to be activated. It seems that I need to enter some harsher or even extreme living environments. At this moment, Roexia, slightly pondering, drove the vibranium power armor to slowly get up. The tall body stepped towards the outside of the ancient hall. He was going to find Tiberos to discuss whether the Carcharodons had any combat plans that needed help recently. Dash 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 dash. In a short period of time, due to the repeated rectification by the Lamenter's Terminator squad, the mortal servants and mortal auxiliary troops in the Carcharodons chapter obviously lived a more normal life as human crew members. For example, there was enough fresh water and corpse starch, and occasionally they could get some meat as a daily reward. And the Astartes of the Carcharodons chapter also changed their attitude towards mortals to some extent because of the prestige of Roexia, this Primarch. At least they wouldn't kill people at every turn because of some daily trivial matters. However, the price paid for maintaining the superficial prosperity is also real. That is the relationship between the Lamenters and the Carcharodons now. It was even worse than before, and it could be said to have dropped to a difficult-to-melt freezing point. As for the specific reasons, if you trace the roots, it is actually the disaster planted by Rorschach himself. The last time he descended on the Minotaur's chapter, he casually sent the Lamenter's chapter's battle barge, Storm's Maiden, all the way to the Carcharodon's chapter in the outer domain. In the eyes of everyone in the Carcharodon's chapter, this was undoubtedly Lord Rorschach's reward and favor to their entire chapter. But when these Lamenters who had never participated in the Badab War discovered the battle barge, what they thought was that their chapter's flagship had actually fallen into the hands of Carcharodons. Then the Carcharodons must have had a fierce conflict with the Lamenter's chapter. Maybe every one of them was stained with the blood of the Lamenter's brothers. Even Rorschach, who couldn't explain it to everyone, thought this was just the Carcharodon's chapter taking the blame for the Minotaur's chapter. But according to the Carcharodon's style of doing things and their strange temper, they never intended to explain it clearly. After all, even if we Carcharodons really robbed it, what can you Lamenter's chapter do? If it weren't for the sake of the Primarch, Rorschach, just 25 Terminators, is it really hard to kill? Of course, currently, the entire Void Fleet has Chapter Master Tyberos and Rorschach, these two great gods, suppressing it. The conflicts and contradictions between the people have not once again evolved into more serious bloodshed. But in order to maintain the peace and stability between the two sides, after careful consideration, Rorschach and Chapter Master Tyberos met and discussed. They decided to imitate the traditional customs of the Space Wolves and the Dark Angels, or the Imperial Fists. Hold a fighting activity called Void Feast, according to the process of the 13-game system. Finally, a double champion jointly recognized by the Carcharodon's chapter and the Lamenter's chapter will be selected. Of course, during the duel, both sides are allowed to cause serious injuries or amputations. But it is not allowed to deprive the battle brothers of their lives. Any Astartes who dares to disobey the order will be executed on the spot by Chapter Master Tyberos or Rorschach himself. And after this important news was confirmed by the Carcharodon's chapter council, almost everyone in the Void Fleet, which has not had many entertainment activities, became excited. Even the mortals at the bottom of the ship were allowed to become viewers of this event. This undoubtedly brought great comfort and morale boost to all mortal crew members. Although this will consume a lot of panacea and food reserves. But even Chapter Master Tyberos, a stubborn existence like steel, did not raise much objection. In fact, if the rules of the competition system did not allow Primarch Rorschach and Tyberos, these completely over-standard Astartes, to join, the two of them didn't want to be the referees and judges standing on the sidelines, but wanted to experience the mental journey of becoming a double chapter champion. The battle barge, Water Wraith. Under the bright lights, countless mortals and a large number of Astartes distinctly surrounded a large training ground, making it impenetrable. Looking around, almost all the mortals were standing behind the Crying Sun's chapter, while the number of mortals on the Space Shark's side was significantly smaller, accompanying the ear-splitting shouts and excited roars that rose and fell. In the center of the training ground, a Terminator Astartes from the Crying Suns was engaged in an incredibly fierce close-quarters combat with a Space Shark's Astartes also clad in ancient Terminator armor. Instantly, the heavy fists and feet of both sides danced into afterimages, and countless pieces of ceramite armor fragments continued to fly and scatter with each attack. This also resulted in many metal fragments occasionally splashing onto the bodies of Luo Sha and others standing on the edge of the training ground. Tyberos, I think we should have them take off their armor before fighting in the next round. If we continue at this rate, I'm afraid the Techmarines in the chapter will secretly curse us for coming up with such a terrible idea. Luo Sha, with his arms crossed, slightly shook off some of the debris that had fallen on his heavy shoulder armor. With a calm expression, he turned his head towards Chapter Master Tyberos standing beside him and said in a deep voice, "Maintaining weapons and equipment is the duty and honor of the Techmarines, but I also do not object to the Primarch's idea. Even though the Space Sharks chapter is slightly richer now, it is difficult to support the consumption of resources like a first founding chapter." Chapter Master Tyberos's pale face, like that of a dead man, showed no emotional fluctuations. He simply stared at the two sides fighting fiercely in the arena with his black eyes and replied to Luo Sha in a low voice. "Technology and productivity can smooth out many differences. Have you ever thought about finding a suitable planet to establish a monastery for the Space Sharks chapter?" Even if it's just used as a manufacturing factory, it would be a great help to the chapter itself. At this moment, Luo Sha, with his eyebrows slightly raised, suddenly spoke to Tiberos. As soon as his voice fell, Tiberos, taking a deep breath, slowly turned his neck. He stared at Luo Sha with his emotionless black eyes and asked, "Primarch, is this an order issued by you as a Primarch, or a suggestion made in your personal capacity? Chapter Master, do you have any thoughts on this?" However, upon hearing Tiberos's question, Luo Sha, gradually narrowing his eyes, did not choose to answer directly. Instead, he threw the question back to the other party. "Forgive my frankness, Primarch. I believe that a space shark that stops swimming will lose its terrifying deterrent to the enemy and the hunger to devour prey, which is not a good thing. Moreover, our space shark's chapter culture is almost deeply ingrained in the marrow of every Astartes neophyte, even more effective than the Codex Astartes, and it is not something that can be easily changed. Perhaps, stubbornness is also one of the inherent traits of the space sharks." Chapter Master Tiberos seemed to be silent for a moment, but he still tried to carefully choose his words and said to Luo Sha cautiously, "Well, I understand, I was just saying it casually, you don't need to mind it." As soon as the other party's voice fell, Luo Sha, who had been narrowing his eyes, immediately grinned and returned to his normal state. He raised a palm and lightly patted Tiberos's incomparably hard ceramite armor, and said in a relaxed and indifferent tone, "Roar." At this moment, accompanied by a roar that resounded throughout the training ground, enthusiastic cheers that were almost deafening instantly rang out from all around. Luo Sha and Tiberos immediately looked in the direction of the sound. They found that the battle in the center of the training ground had temporarily been decided. The space shark's Astartes with the highest winning rate was unexpectedly eliminated. Instead, the Crying Sun's Astartes, whose helmet was broken and whose armor was covered with battle damage marks, had won the first match. So, Luo Sha, with a smile on his lips, immediately raised his hand and applauded. At the same time, he also turned his head to signal Tiberos to step onto the field and announce the subsequent competition rules. And just as Tiberos stood on the training ground, swaying his huge body, all the sounds seemed to disappear in an instant. Only his emotionless, low voice was telling the newly changed competition rules. Dong dong dong. At this moment, the tall figure of the space shark's chief librarian T. Kahurangi faintly appeared on the periphery of the countless silent crowds. Open black lens bracket replace source app close black lens bracket. Luo Sha, who was scanning the surroundings, subconsciously met the other party's eyes. Then, he drove his vibranium power armor and walked towards him. "Hello, Chief Librarian, are you looking for Tiberos? He will be off the field soon, please wait a moment." Luo Sha nodded to the Chief Librarian and said, "Respected Primarch, the method you and the Chapter Master have jointly discussed has indeed solved many hidden contradictions, and I also thank you for your great care for the Space Sharks chapter. Well, I believe that if you were to take charge of the following matter, there might be unexpected results." Chief Librarian Kahurangi, whose black eyes sparkled with wisdom, squeezed out a stiff smile from his pale face. He bowed slightly and said softly in the direction of Luo Sha, "Oh, what exactly is it? If it involves major events related to the rise and fall of the chapter, Tiberos is the best candidate." Luo Sha stared at the pale nomads and asked, "A hunting squad that has been away from the chapter for a long time has just returned from the void. They have brought some news to the chapter, which requires us old guys to hold a void conference to judge their actions, but I personally believe that without your help, their only end will probably be execution one by one." That's serious. What's the charge? Luo Sha raised his eyebrows. He asked the Chief Librarian with a puzzled tone. "Primarch, this is a long story. The captain of the hunting squad is a brother priest named Tongata Manu. Many years ago, he lost an ancient relic due to an accident. In order to atone for his sins, he chose to bear the necessary responsibility of retrieving this ancient relic alone. However, the chapter itself is limited by the scarcity of resources and combat power, and cannot provide too much help. Even so, that brother priest has spent a lot of the chapter's resources and spent thousands of years but has never retrieved that crucial ancient relic. The Space Sharks chapter will tolerate failure, but cannot tolerate failure for thousands of years. Of course, the most important point is that the ancient relic was actually a precious artifact personally entrusted to us forgotten by the Father of the Void. The Void Shard, empty, silent glass, according to Chief Librarian Kulanchi. That was an ancient artifact that Korax, the Raven Lord, entrusted to these Forgotten Ones to guard before banishing the Carcharodon's Astra chapter. Unfortunately, the Primarch did not reveal the specific function of the ancient artifact, only leaving a warning that it could be used in times of utter desperation. However, more than 1,000 years ago, the Carcharodon's Astra chapter lost this ancient artifact. And the chaplain brother responsible for guarding the artifact became the only one seeking to recover it as a means of atonement. Perhaps the Astartes of the Carcharodon's Astra chapter were once furious and roared in anger. But today, 1,000 years later, they seem to have given up hope of ever recovering the ancient artifact. Although I can understand that the Carcharodon's Astra chapter's past circumstances were indeed difficult, and it was also a perplexing problem that the Raven Lord didn't explain things clearly when he entrusted you with the ancient artifact. But the fact that you actually plan to gloss over it like this is simply beyond my imagination. Upon the metal throne in the ancient hall, Lord Commander Lorsch, with a stern expression, first swept his gaze over Chapter Master Tyberos, who remained silent. Then he turned his icy gaze towards the oldest Astartes of the Carcharodon's Astra. I wouldn't even know about this if it weren't for the pale nomads accidentally telling me. Whether you possess or lose a mere ancient artifact is irrelevant, but I strongly dislike this attitude of you Carcharodon's Astra chapter. As soon as his words fell, Lorsch abruptly raised a hand clad in a vibranium gauntlet and clenched it into a fist. He slammed his fist heavily onto the armrest of the metal throne, creating a deafening boom of clashing metal. Thud, thud, thud. In the next moment, all the Astartes, including Chapter Master Tyberos, without hesitation, knelt on one knee towards the metal throne, slowly lowering their heads. Please quell your anger, Primarch. Honorable Primarch, the Carcharodon's Astra chapter in the past was indeed unable to cope with this matter. Countless incursions of the Tyranids into the Ghoul stars, or even more mysterious Xenos, also diverted too much of our energy. At this moment, Chief Librarian Pale Nomad first raised his lowered head. He stared at Lorsch on the metal throne with a pair of dark eyes and said loudly, Primarch, now may be the crucial opportunity for Carcharodon's Astra to completely recover the ancient artifact. The emergence of the Great Rift and the more frequent incursions of the Tyranids mean there is no more dire combat situation than the present. Although we do not know what the empty, silent glass ancient artifact represents, if it is useful, we can not only use it to deal with the Tyranids, but also help the Imperium cope with more battlefields. As soon as his words fell, Lorsch, squinting his eyes, exchanged a very subtle glance with the Chief Librarian. Let that chaplain brother in. I think we need more intelligence to understand the whole picture. In the next second, Lorsch, taking a deep breath, leaned his vibranium power armor against the back of the metal throne. He immediately waved his hand towards the people below. After all, the Astartes successively stood up from the ground. A chaplain brother wearing old power armor led his hunting squad into the ancient hall. Chaplain of the Carcharodon's Astra chapter, Tongata Manu, the sinner who lost the ancient artifact, greets the Primarch. The Astartes chaplain named Manu knelt on one knee without hesitation. Those Astartes following behind him also offered their loyalty to Lorsch without delay. All right, stand up, let's get down to business first. Lorsch raised an eyebrow slightly. He raised his hand to signal those in front of him to stand up immediately. I heard you have been searching for the ancient artifact, empty, silent glass, for over 1,000 years. Reporting to the Primarch, it has been 1,453 years. Chaplain Manu raised his head slightly, looking at Lorsch with a pair of dark eyes as he replied. Then in these 1,453 years, have you ever discovered any traces of the empty, silent glass? Lorsch continued to ask with a serious expression. Reporting to the Primarch, only once, and it was before our return. Chaplain Manu nodded without any hesitation. Oh, then why didn't you recover the ancient artifact? Or was the enemy you faced at the time difficult to deal with? Lorsch gazed at the chaplain brother below and asked casually. Chaplain Manu paused slightly, but still said without concealment. Accurately speaking, by the time we discovered the artifact's whereabouts, it was already a bit late. The ancient artifact had been stolen by a Dark Eldar Cabal called the Piercing Rose. Cabal, Dark Eldar. Upon hearing the familiar Xenos race, Lorsch, whose expression gradually became serious, slowly straightened his spine. He once again questioned Chaplain Manu. Why would the Dark Eldar seek out an ancient artifact belonging to the Raven Lord? Primarch, those knife-ears do not know what that thing is. They simply believe that it may be a precious treasure that can win the favor of the Cabal's Archon, we still have a chance to recover this ancient artifact, but it requires your the Carcharodon's Astra chapter's strong support. Chaplain Manu took a deep breath. He slowly bowed to Lorsch on the metal throne. Tiberos, what do you think about this matter? At this moment, Lorsch turned his gaze and looked at Tiberos, who had been silent all along. Primarch, I believe that is just an ethereal ancient artifact. Although it is incomparably precious, it is not worth the Carcharodon's Astra chapter using more resources and combat power, and rather than believing that a sinner who has failed for 1,453 years can succeed, I would rather cleanly grant him final judgment. Slowly raising his two lightning claws, Tiberos stared at the tall figure of Chaplain Manu. He said in a low voice towards Lorsch, Chaplain Tongata Manu, do you have anything else to say? Lorsch, without expressing any intention, placed his gaze on the chaplain brother. He asked the other party in a calm tone, Honorable Primarch, Chapter Master, and all Void Brothers, I am indeed a sinner who unfortunately lost the ancient artifact, unforgivable, but this time, I am willing to guarantee it with my life. I know which Dark Eldar stole the empty, silent glass, and I also know which Cabal they belong to, and there is even only one last clue left to track. I implore the Primarch and Chapter Master to allow me to continue hunting. If this mission ultimately fails, I am willing to immediately accept execution, but if it succeeds, we will be able to reclaim the empty, silent glass, and even use it to launch revenge against more enemies of the Emperor. The deep voice of Chaplain Manu echoed throughout the ancient hall. Rokas, leaning against the metal throne, seemed to ponder for a moment. Soon after, he finally made his judgment and choice. I would have preferred not to interfere with your Carcharodon's chapter's internal judgment, but after all, the ancient artifact involves Corvus Corax, and I have some interest in the things left behind by this Primarch brother with whom I have a good relationship. Therefore, Chaplain Manu, your life is temporarily spared by me. From this moment on, you will fight for me. At this moment, as Roka's words fell, Chaplain Manu, whose expression was obviously excited, and his hunting squad immediately activated their power armor and knelt on one knee. Without hesitation, they once again pledged their loyalty to Rokas. Before Chapter Master Tiberos, who was standing aside, could speak, Rokas preemptively raised a hand clad in orichalcum to stop him. Then, he said lightly to the people below, however, in order to respect the customs and systems of the Carcharodon's chapter, I will not forcibly order any Carcharodon's Astartes to participate in this mission. It is entirely up to you whether you are willing or not. Moreover, I believe that with me and the Lamenter's Guard, plus a hunting squad, it is enough to retrieve the Nullstone. Chaplain Manu, didn't you say you already had a plan and preparations? Now you can tell me about it. Yes, Primarch. Chaplain Manu seemed to take a deep breath. He quickly raised his pale head, stared at Rokas with a pair of black eyes, and slowly began to tell a series of plans. Dash 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 dash. Araya was an ordinary chapter serf. Or rather, she was a mortal slave belonging to the Carcharodon's chapter. However, what made Araya not ordinary was that she actually gave birth to a child in the Carcharodon's Void Fleet and successfully hid the boy for more than 10 years. Although Araya's child was so dull and stupid that he could only say one word, door. But he was always the apple of his mother's eye and the treasure in her heart. However, Araya believed that she would not have much time to spend with her child. Not long ago, this silly son, who liked to run around, was discovered by other chapter serfs because he did not have a chapter mark. Originally, Araya, who thought she was bound to die, and her silly son were kept in the private cabin of the ship by a noble chaplain. Araya didn't know what he wanted to do, but as long as it could let her son live, she would be willing to die. As time went by, the chaplain, whose eyes were black and teeth as sharp as files, returned to the private cabin once again. Araya, whose expression was numb, thought that the last moment for her and her silly son had arrived. But after she led her silly son to finally stand in the center of an ancient and magnificent hall. Slightly dazed, she couldn't help but look at the mysterious figure sitting above the throne. Even Araya, who only cared about her silly son, had heard of this scion of the God Emperor. A Primarch even more noble than the chaplain. It was also this Primarch who allowed the mortal serfs in the chapter to regain better food and normal treatment. At this moment, Araya, whose thoughts were racing, quickly grabbed her silly son, who was still chanting, door, and knelt on the cold metal floor. She desperately began to make the most humble plea to the people around her. No matter what price she had to pay. As a mother, she only hoped that her son could continue to live. Respected Primarch, esteemed masters, this is my son, Jonah. He is my heart, my soul, and the only support for my constant prayers to the Emperor. I am willing to do anything the masters ask to exchange for his hope of survival. At this moment, Araya, who was originally prone on the cold floor, suddenly raised her sparse head. With a courage that she didn't know where it came from, she said even louder to the people around her. But I beg you to remember the following words. I did violate the chapter's regulations and secretly gave birth to this child. At that time, I had to try my best not to make any noise, lest Jonah be discovered by others. I held him in my arms, gave him warmth and milk. At that time, he was so weak and humble, but every one of you was not much bigger than Jonah when you were born. Every one of you was also given precious life by your mother. She held you, raised you, protected you, until you grew up enough to be taken away by the angels and go to the side of the Void Father to serve. I know you may still remember the appearance of that honored father, but who of you still remembers your mother's face? But, I'm sure your mother must still remember what you look like. Cherishing your warmth. At this moment, Araya's eyes seemed to be filled with tears. Her cold hand tightly grasped her son Jonah's small palm, although that slightly dull son still only chanted the word, door. But his pure gaze subconsciously stared at his mother's pale and thin profile. Pa pa pa. At this moment, with the echo of Araya's words, Rokas, who was gradually straightening his back on the metal throne, clapped his hands vigorously. He let out a hearty laugh with an incomparably loud voice. Ha 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 ha. Good. Well said, Carcharodons, have you all seen it? Sometimes, you Astartes are not even as good as an ordinary mortal. Your name is Araya, right? Your son's name is Jonah. I now accept you as my people in the name of the human Primarch. You can all live. Chaplain Manu, your plan to use the special bloodline of this mother and son as bait to attract the conspiracy group has been rejected by me. As the Emperor's blade, you need mortals to sacrifice for your necessary duties. You Astartes are not ashamed, but I, a Primarch, am ashamed. Chief Librarian Kulan Gi, go and inform the Lamenter's guard to immediately cease the Void Feast. Let them re-equip their armor and prepare ammunition. Tiberos, I, as a Primarch, order you to personally lead this hunting squad to participate in this mission. If you, this chapter master, unfortunately die on the battlefield, it will be your Carcharodon's chapter atoning for my Primarch brother. You, and you, do you understand? At this moment, Rokas, who slowly stood up from the metal throne, swept his cold gaze towards all the Carcharodons present. Then, he said almost word by word in a deep voice. Chapter Master Tiberos, after hearing the order, did not hesitate at all. Even that pale dead face seemed to reveal a grim smile. He swayed his huge body and stepped forward, and when the whole person knelt on one knee. Two lightning power claws also heavily collided on the metal floor. Carcharodon's chapter master Tiberos respectfully obeys the Primarch's order. Priest Manu's bait plan was actually very simple. Through constant tracking, he discovered that the cult of the Piercing Rose liked to select humans with specific bloodlines in countless human worlds to carry out restricted level killing rituals. This was to please their twisted minds and delay Slaanesha's absorption of souls. According to genetic testing, Alaya and her son Jonah were likely the only survivors of that specific bloodline. Furthermore, her son Jonah wasn't simply dull, but his soul was too pure, even flawless, which suppressed the development of his self-awareness. Therefore, faced with such precious human beings, the Dark Eldar, who were almost addicted to violence, couldn't resist the temptation. Unfortunately, Rohaxia, the Primarch, had to give a thumbs up to the Great Mother Elias' generous speech. Moreover, Rohaxia suddenly realized. Perhaps it was because he, the Primarch, was too good to the Carcharodons. These damned Astartes were getting a little too cocky. Some of their actions had repeatedly provoked his psychological bottom line. If it weren't for Chapter Master Tiberos always being sensible, and Chief Librarian Pale Nomad completely siding with Rohaxia, then he would probably have to use the blood of a small number of Astartes to re-establish his authority. Soon after, with the issuance of Rohaxia's order, the Lamenters were reorganized into a Terminator squad, carrying heavy weapons such as bolters and assault cannons, and arrived on the ship's deck. Fully armed, Tiberos also led the members of the hunting squad to this location. To Rohaxia's slight surprise, Chief Librarian Pale Nomad also joined the hunting squad. Facing Rorschach's slightly doubtful gaze, Pale Nomad, subconsciously revealing his shark teeth, smiled slightly and said to the Primarch in a soft voice. Primarch, do you still remember the story I once told you? About my experience as a Carcharodon's librarian, there are actually some small follow-ups to that story. My mother and relatives all died in the battle against the beasts, but only one younger brother survived. Tisk, I understand. Priest Manu is your younger brother. No wonder you came to me. Rorschach, who had completely connected everything, turned his gaze to Priest Manu not far away. He raised a hand clad in oromite and patted Pale Nomad's heavy shoulder armor, nodding as he said. Seeing as you're doing this for your family and duty, there won't be a next time. Remember to give me 200% of your strength when carrying out the mission later. No problem, Primarch. Pale Nomad, his sharp teeth slightly closed, immediately nodded in response. Buzz buzz buzz. About a dozen minutes later, accompanied by the engine roar of several Thunderhawk transports. The transports carrying everyone slowly flew towards the Gladius-class frigate named Grey Shark. Inside the transport where Rorschach was, Elia and Jonah, wearing half a set of carapace armor and carrying a small refraction field, were also sitting in the wide seats. Rorschach originally didn't want Elia and her son to join this operation, and even pardoned their servant and slave status. But Elia and her son's firm attitude to repay their gratitude, and Priest Manu's repeated persuasion, still made Rorschach make the decision to bring the two mortals along. However, Rorschach also made it clear to Priest Manu, if anything happened to either of the mother and son, not only would Priest Manu and Astartes not have to live, even his hunting squad and Pale Nomad would be implicated even more. Because in the eyes of him, the Primarch, even Astartes were never more precious than any mortal. Dash 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 dash. An unknown garden world. The faint light from dusk shone on the calm, warm sea like a heater. The pure seawater, where you could almost see dozens of meters deep from the surface, occasionally had many strange-shaped marine creatures swimming past. Swish swish swish. However, in this picturesque scene, an extremely cruel massacre was rapidly unfolding on a luxury cruise ship named Emperor's Wish. Accompanied by the explosive sound of countless crystal shuriken, a cult warrior who kept grinning wildly swung the agonizer in his palm. The spiked tip of the whip, rapidly slicing through the air, suddenly wrapped around a fair-skinned, tall human female. As she screamed and begged in extreme horror, the cult warrior only stared obsessively at the smooth skin on her body. A few minutes later, a twitching corpse of flesh and blood was casually thrown onto the expensive deck. A pale human skin stained with blood was obsessively held in the palm of the cult warrior. However, at this moment, the other party, whose keen senses vaguely sensed something, had just raised his head. Metal-throwing stars that suddenly cut through the air were wrapped with purple energy and forcibly penetrated the cult warrior's slender body, completely tearing him into countless pieces of flesh and blood. Rumble rumble. At the same time, the Terminator squad led by Tyberos also arrived heavily on the deck of the luxury cruise ship in a teleportation formation. In an instant, the roar of countless bolters and the terrifying roar of assault cannons almost instantly suppressed the wailing and pain of a large number of mortals. Dong dong dong. At this moment, Rorschach, wearing an oromite helmet, drove his oromite power armor back and forth between the decks several times. Within dozens of seconds, a dozen cult warriors, along with the power weapons in their palms, were forcibly split into several pieces by the green light-entwined Blood Reaver. Then, ignoring the painful wails of a large number of aliens, Rorschach suddenly raised his oromite helmet. And within the range of his lenses, on the top deck railing of the luxury cruise ship, a Draken wearing exquisite cult armor, that is, a high-ranking officer of the Dark Eldar cult, was condescendingly overlooking everything below. Target located. Remember, keep him alive, but also prevent him from activating the webway and escaping. Rorschach, slightly shaking his oromite helmet, immediately issued an order through the communication channel. Among the Terminator squad that was suppressing and slaughtering the cult warriors, half of the Astartes instantly drove their Terminator armor and launched a charge towards the internal passages of the ship. At this moment, Rorschach, who was observing the target, seemed to see a faint sneer on the pale face of that cult Draken through his lenses. Cry, laugh, when you fall into our hands personally, I guarantee that even Slaanesh's soul torment will be a small trick. Rohaxia, slowly clenching the Blood Reaver, immediately activated his Oromite power armor. His whole person was like a heavy but agile metal gorilla, relying on the adventurous action of nailing the Blood Reaver into the bulkhead, and rapidly climbed upwards. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Tisk, tisk, what a barbaric and foolish monkey race, you utterly defile my eyes, which are like the black sun. Udik, a Drukhari, looked down at Rorschach, who was climbing up the bulkhead, with disdain. He murmured to himself in the ancient language of the Eldar, like an aria. The next second, a power whip crackling with a vicious blue light slashed through the air. It slammed towards Rorschach, who was about to reach the top deck. Buzz buzz buzz. Having anticipated this, Rorschach flicked his fingers slightly. The metal 10 rings, still far away, were rapidly recalled, and then constantly revolved around his vibranium power armor, forming an airtight spiral storm. Clang clang clang, accompanied by countless crisp sounds of deflecting the power whip. 2 metal 10 rings suddenly changed their direction of flight, and then quickly cushioned below Rorschach's magnetic boots. They actually carried him, the whole person, charging towards the enemy. Aha, seeing that a foolish monkey had already arrived in front of him. Udik, who was retreating nimbly, had no fear on his pale, bloodless face. Instead, he let out a strange, high-pitched laugh from his mouth. Then, he reached back from behind his Kabbalite armor and pulled out a spirit blade shaped like a spinal bone, intending to engage in close combat and seek some stimulation. Crack crack crack, however, at this moment, accompanied by a series of sudden sounds of wood breaking. Several huge hands covered in ceramite armor suddenly pierced through the deck under Utak's feet, and actually grabbed his ankles and pulled downwards. And before Utak, who looked surprised, could wave the electro-corrosive power whip and spirit blade in his palm again. Another Contemptor dreadnought, which had crashed through a large area of the deck, had already jumped up behind him. It even used only one incomparably thick metal arm to firmly restrain the Dark Eldar's neck and throat. Scrape scrape scrape, the Dark Eldar Udik, who was instantly imprisoned, could no longer laugh. His whole person also lost the leisurely and playful attitude he had before. Gradually deprived of oxygen, Udik had no choice but to drop the power whip. He quickly changed the way he held the spirit blade in his palm. However, just as he was about to stab this vicious weapon towards the dreadnought behind him, a metal 10 ring that suddenly slashed through the air shattered the spirit blade, along with half of Utak's palm. At the same time, the metal 10 rings, constantly surrounded by purple light, revolved around the vibranium power armor. Rorschach, carrying the blood scythe on his thick shoulder armor, slowly came to the Dark Eldar's front. He slightly rotated the helmet's lenses, and his cold gaze overlooked Udik, who was constantly leaving claw marks on the dreadnought's ceramite arms. A deep voice suddenly floated out from inside the helmet. The mission objective has been successfully captured. Tiberius, send the remaining pointy ears to feed the sharks. Hiss, you will pay the price for this. At this moment, the Dark Eldar, his eyes bloodshot, used almost all of his strength. Struggling constantly, he threatened Rorschach in front of him with difficulty. Thump, however, the next second, a vibranium iron fist suddenly swung by Rorschach directly sent Utak's already blurred consciousness into a state of complete unconsciousness. Crack crack crack, quickly releasing his thick arms, the Contemptor dreadnought immediately activated his power armor and stood up. It first slightly shook its metal helmet towards Rorschach in front. Then, the whole person unhesitatingly carried the Dark Eldar and ran towards the evacuation point. Thump thump thump. Dozens of seconds later, when Rorschach slowly drove the vibranium power armor to the edge of the top deck, he just happened to see through the lenses. Chapter Master Tiberius, covered in Eldar flesh and blood, was personally throwing the Dark Eldar, who were constantly making terrified wails, into the rippling sea one by one. And beneath the turbid sea surface where countless blood and waves were repeatedly intertwined. Countless brutal sharks summoned by the pale nomads were desperately chewing on the alien races that kept falling into the water. At this moment, the miserable screams made by these Dark Eldar, who had always been cruel, were no different from the mortals they had wantonly slaughtered just now. Dash 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 dash. The Gray Shark, corvettes were docked in the near-Earth orbit of the Garden World. And when Rorschach and others, who had returned in triumph, slowly walked out of the Storm Eagle transport, Tiberius was still carrying Udik, who was still unconscious, in his palm, intending to walk towards the interrogation room. Jonah, who had been repeatedly chanting the word, door, in his mouth, suddenly looked towards the Dark Eldar in Araja's arms. With a solemn expression, he pointed at the other party with a small hand and shouted, Udik, At this moment, everyone, including Rorschach, looked at Araja and her son Jonah, who looked flustered, in unison. Pale Nomad, take little Jonah to test his psychic abilities later, I'm sure none of us have revealed any information in front of them. Rorschach, thoughtfully, turned his head and said to Chief Librarian Kahulanchi. And the Chief Librarian, who nodded in agreement, smiled slightly. He fixed his dark eyes on the direction of the mortal mother and son. About a dozen minutes later, the Dark Eldar Udik, who was still unconscious, was roughly stripped of his Kabbalite armor by Tiberius's rough movements, and then casually thrown into a specially made interrogation room. There were no torture tools in this empty room. It was even thoughtfully wrapped with any sharp corners that could cause harm. This special method of extracting confessions called silence of punishment. It was perfect for the Dark Eldar. Because if ordinary torture methods were used, the Dark Eldar, who were basically all psychopaths, might personally give pointers to make themselves more comfortable. And according to Rorschach's understanding from Tiberius, ordinary Astartes could resist this form of punishment for 3 to 5 days. And the flesh-tearers, who were already accustomed to silence, could even last for about a month. But even with the superhuman will and physical strength of the Astartes, facing the terrifying silence of punishment would basically lead to mental breakdown. As for how long this Dark Eldar who just went in could resist, it depended on how perverted the other party's spirit was. Boom boom boom. Before long, the Dark Eldar, who had successfully woken up, began to vigorously slap the metal door of the interrogation room, making bursts of collision sounds. And in the gaps between the slaps, occasional curses mixed with the language of the Eldar were constantly transmitted. Feeling a little bored, Rorschach listened with his ear to the side for a while. Slightly shaking his head, he turned around and drove the vibranium power armor away from the metal passage. Dark Eldar, then enjoy the silent darkness. Gray Shark, Class Frigate, Day 3. The Dark Eldar Utak, his expression utterly haggard, was personally brought before Rourke by Chaplain Manu. At this point, Utak, ready to confess even his own origins to everyone, had completely succumbed to the interrogation methods of the Carcharodons. He no longer wanted to face that silent environment where even the peristaltic sounds of his intestines were clearly audible. Nor did he want his sleep interrupted by powerful torrents of water that automatically activated at intervals. Only 3 days. Do you Dark Eldar Xenos even have any willpower? Luckily, I didn't bet with that old pale nomad, or I would have definitely lost. Sitting on the metal throne, Rourke propped his chin with a hand made of vibranium. He stared intently at the Dark Eldar, whose eyes seemed to be filled with tears, and said calmly, Respected Lord, why have you gone to such lengths to bring me here? If you need some entertainment, I know a few white elves who are always willing. They don't have any prejudice against other races. Seeking death. Before Utak could finish speaking, Chaplain Manu, with a blank expression, kicked the Dark Eldar to the metal floor. He stared down at Utak on the ground and roared in a low voice. Xenos, how dare you insult the Primarch? It seems you haven't had enough time in the interrogation room. I'll throw you back in there right now. I was wrong. Wait, Primarch, you are. Just then, the Dark Eldar Utak, who was desperately begging for mercy from Chaplain Manu, seemed to have just realized something. He immediately turned his head in utter shock. His gaze fixed on Rourke, who was sitting on the metal throne, not even noticing that his words were beginning to stutter. Heh, you know too much. Rourke, narrowing his eyes, leaned forward. He said to the Dark Eldar in a low voice filled with killing intent. I am looking for something called the Void Glass, an ancient relic stolen by your Twisted Rose Cabal, do you understand? As soon as Rourke finished speaking, the Dark Eldar Utak shuddered involuntarily and quickly propped up his emaciated body. He knelt on the cold metal floor and shouted urgently, Primarch, don't kill me, please don't kill me, I'll agree to anything, I do know the real whereabouts of that thing. I was the one who personally handed it over to the Archon of the Twisted Rose Cabal. Where is it, or rather, where is your Archon? Rourke, His expression cold, slowly activated his vibranium power armor and stood up. The faint energy emanating from the purple halo above the power pack clearly reflected on Utak's naked body, which was trying to curl up, and also cast overlapping shadows on the metal floor. Geminor. He's in our Dark Eldar webway city of Geminor. I know where the nearest webway gate is. As long as you promise to spare my life, I can take you to him at any time. After all, your enemy is my enemy, and eliminating them will make it easier for me to become a high-ranking member of Geminor. The Dark Eldar Utak said. He raised his emaciated, pale face. At this moment, Rourke, squinting, could even clearly see the various desires that had returned to the other party. The Dark Eldar's pursuit and desire for various desires even surpassed their fear of life and death to some extent. Utak, you can keep your life for now, but if I find out that you've deceived us, I will tear you apart with my own hands. As soon as he finished speaking, Rourke, with an indifferent expression, watched the Dark Eldar Utak, whose face showed joy, being dragged away by the tall chaplain Manu. After the other party's figure completely disappeared, he reactivated his vibranium power armor and sat back on the metal throne, muttering to himself. It seems I need to make a trip to Geminor myself. I hope our subsequent actions go smoothly. May the Emperor protect. Dash 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 dash. Some time later, on the deck of the ship where the Astartes were gathering, Chief Librarian Pale Nomad, holding a power staff, walked to Rourke in his power armor. He bowed slightly first, then he stepped forward and lowered his voice as much as possible, saying, Primarch, that mortal boy Jonah didn't test positive for any psychic abilities, but judging from the various abnormal behaviors he has exhibited, perhaps our methods of testing for psychic abilities are a bit outdated, so we can't figure out the special talent he possesses. There's also one more thing, that is, my psychic divination also tells me that this raid on Geminor must include the mortal boy Jonah, otherwise we will definitely miss the Void Glass, and even fall into various unknown and great dangers. Oh, are you sure? After hearing Pale Nomad's words, Rourke, frowning slightly, turned his head to look at the Chief Librarian's dark eyes. Truth be told, infiltrating Geminor was a risky endeavor that even he, as a Primarch, couldn't guarantee he could escape unscathed. If the team also included a mortal mother and son, the risk of accidental exposure would be even greater. Primarch, I guarantee with the life of a Chief Librarian and the honor of the Karkradon's chapter that this is absolutely true. We may only have this one chance to retrieve the Void Glass. If we accidentally fail, I'm afraid we will never be able to find it again. Pale Nomad's words made Rourke think for a moment. Finally, he slowly nodded in agreement. Chief Librarian, go find that mother and son and arrange everything properly. Get them any wearable mortal protective equipment you can find. In the subsequent actions, no matter what happens, you and your chaplain brothers only have one thing to do, and that is to protect them with your lives. Do you understand? Yes, Primarch. Pale Nomad unhesitatingly turned and left in his power armor. And after the other party's tall figure gradually moved away from Rourke's line of sight, Rourke, taking a deep breath, immediately became busy infiltrating Geminor, and raiding and capturing a Cabal Archon. It meant that they could not blatantly lead the entire Karkradon's chapter to launch an operation. Otherwise, once it attracted the attention of countless Dark Eldar and even Homunculi in the entire Geminor. Even with the combat power of the Karkradon's chapter, they would suffer immeasurable losses. In the end, led by Rourke and Tyberos, the hunting squad led by Chaplain Manu and Chief Librarian, plus 5 Lamenter's Terminators became the only candidates for this raid team. Moreover, to be on the safe side, Chapter Master Tyberos also secretly ordered all the Astartes of the entire Karkradon's chapter to stand by, ready to move out at any time. If an accident happened, even if the entire Karkradon's chapter of Astartes died in Geminor, they must ensure the safety of Primarch Rourke. Comorig, a final lair of the Dark Eldar, hidden deep within the webway. Those beings who dare not speak its name call it the Dark City. However, the scale of this fallen place cannot be simply summarized by the word city. It is possibly the largest hive metropolis ever conceived. Countless ports, narrow passages, and hidden conduits connect vast space cities, ancient ships, and even orbital satellites. From a certain angle within the webway, Comorig, with its fangs and spines, resembles a vicious virus lurking within the webway's arteries. Most importantly, Comorig's webway tendrils can reach almost anywhere in the real universe. Crossing countless light years is but a step for Comorig's inhabitants, through those shimmering webway gates. Buzzing, accompanied by ripples spreading across the void mirror surface like water waves. An ancient webway gate, silent for a long time, emitted a sound of activation. This caused a pair of Kabbalite warriors, engaged in clandestine activities in a dark corner, to instinctively turn their heads. Tevist, hasn't this thing been abandoned for ages? How can it still activate? One of the Kabbalite warriors, kneeling on the ground, raised a hand to wipe the liquid from his blood-red lips. He casually picked up a splinter rifle from the ground and looked up to ask his lover. Delma, how should I know? Maybe some feral Eldar accidentally stumbled upon a webway beacon, or perhaps a Kabbalite raiding party has just finished their pillaging. Come with me, let's take a look, maybe we can get a share of the spoils. The other Kabbalite warrior quickly got up and adjusted the position of his armor. Then, he reached out and pulled up his kneeling friend. The two cautiously walked towards the activating webway gate. Rumble, however, just as the two Dark Eldar were less than 10 meters away from the buzzing webway gate. A huge hand covered in iron-gray ceramite armor suddenly emerged from the webway's rippling mirror surface. Immediately afterward, two stasis grenades, seemingly conjured from thin air in the palm of the hand, bounced towards the Dark Eldar like metal marbles. Enemy. Unfortunately, before the Dark Eldar, vaguely sensing something amiss, could issue a warning. Boom boom boom. Accompanied by silent explosions, the detonating stasis grenades completely froze the two Dark Eldar in place. The next second, a tall figure wearing iron-gray artificer power armor and draped in a white-skinned, red-lined hooded cloak slowly stepped through the webway gate, successfully arriving in the dark city of Comorig. Ah, seeing familiar living creatures again is truly a blessing. Do you know, the Eye of Terror is no place for anyone to stay, there isn't a single sane thing there. If it weren't to escape the desperate pursuit of those lunatics in the inner circle, I wouldn't want to go in there. Lord Cypher, carrying two sword-shaped melee weapons on the back of his power pack, gazed at the Dark Eldar with a look of feelings and said softly. He then reached out and drew from behind him a master-crafted power weapon, shaped like an ancient Terra greatsword, and slowly stepped forward. Chiz chiz chiz, and when the extremely sharp power greatsword was quickly swung, in an instant, the heads of the two immobile Dark Eldar were chopped off. Lord Cypher, gripping the melee weapon tightly in his palm, sighed without turning his head. Alas, just out of the Eye of Terror, and now into Comorig. Who made me a born workaholic? Of course, the main problem is that the Primarch is too restless. Why did such a good Primarch come here? There's no choice, I, Lord Cypher, can only come to fight crime and eliminate evil. Dark Eldar, you're out of luck this time. Dash 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 dash. Buzzing, with the quiet opening of a webway portal, a dozen towering metal giants successively entered a spacious private room. The flesh tearers and lamenters terminators from the hunting squad quickly raised the bolters and assault cannons in their palms. They rapidly dispersed into a defensive formation, launching the highest degree of vigilance against the surrounding unfamiliar environment. Please rest assured, Primarch, this is my private villa. No one can easily break in here. In our Comorig, Dark Eldar who trespass on another's territory can be dealt with at the owner's discretion. At this moment, Utak, his face full of ingratiating smiles, hurriedly bowed to Rabute and Chapter Master Tyberos beside him. And on the other's slightly raised, pale back, a melt-a-bomb embedded deep in the flesh was emitting a terrifying metallic luster. Utak, I warn you one more time, if you intend to play tricks or schemes, then under the melta, all are equal, understood? Rabute, with an indifferent expression, first scanned the surrounding situation. Then, he turned his gaze. Looking at the Dark Eldar Utak, whose entire person had clearly recovered from a haggard state to a normal state. As you say, I wouldn't dare cause you trouble. Moreover, being singled out by a Primarch for hatred, even if you gave me dozens of lives, I wouldn't dare try. Utak, once again showing a humble smile, said to Rabute without hesitation. All right, let's talk business. How do you plan to trick the Archon of your Twisted Rose Cobble into coming here? Rabute raised his hand to stop the other party's naturally flattering words, as natural as eating and drinking. He took a deep breath and asked, Yes, Primarch, do you prefer a safer method? Or do you prefer a riskier method? The Dark Eldar Utak slightly shook his head. The expression on his pale face suddenly became serious, and he asked Rabute. The Archon Rinu limb of the Twisted Rose Kabul is an old thing who has lived for who knows how long. He has exhausted all stimulation and enjoyment, and currently there are very few things that can attract his attention, but the Void Glass, which I contributed, undoubtedly gained the other party's extreme favor. Otherwise, it would be impossible for me to lead a combat force of a Kabul alone. If you choose a safer method, then hand over these 2 human monkeys to the Archon in exchange for the Void Glass, and with my assistance, it can basically be determined that there will be no problems with this transaction. You don't even have to show your face, and you can get the long-sought ancient treasure back in your hands. However, before the garrulous Utak could finish speaking, the expressionless Rabute stimulated the Dark Eldar in front of him with undisguised killing intent. Do you think I would choose this method? Ah, Primarch, I'm just providing you with suggestions. I also have a riskier method. We can set up a trap with the news of 2 mortal existences. As long as the Archon knows this news, then even if the other party doesn't care, the burning desire will make him act involuntarily. At that time, we can catch him in a jar and do whatever we want. Hearing the Dark Eldar's adventure plan, squinting, Rorschach looked at Warband leader Tiberius and Chief Librarian Pale Nomad. After a brief discussion among everyone, they finally accepted the plan. So, in this private villa filled with countless doors, Utak, closely watched by the Astartes, used a communication device to summon a low-level pointy ear who wasn't even considered a warrior. Utak asked him to deliver a message to the Archon. Tell him that a group of giant monkeys from the Monkey Empire have arrived on the outskirts of Comorig, wanting to make a deal with the Archon himself. At the agreed location, they will exchange a pair of mortal mother and child with special bloodlines for the Void Glass. However, after the excited low-level pointy ear hurriedly turned and ran out of the private villa, the Dark Eldar Utak, with a grinning smile, said to Rorschach and the others with a proud tone. Don't worry, according to the habits of us Dark Eldar, this guy will definitely betray us immediately, which means the news has been successfully released. Hearing these words, Rorschach stared deeply at Utak. The Dark Eldar's style of doing things really gave him a completely refreshed impression of this ancient alien race. Subsequently, everyone began to concentrate on organizing the weapons and equipment they had brought with them. In the following period, they would encounter a fierce battle and fight no matter what. Either they successfully take down the Archon and obtain the ancient artifact, the Void Glass, or they will ultimately be defeated by the aliens and flee Comorig in a sorry state. The outermost periphery of Comorig is a series of vast tributary kingdoms. These spires and palaces, surrounding the capital and located at varying distances, are occasionally bathed in the black sun shining over Comorig. These ancient stars, slowly dying and constantly emitting vicious rays, undoubtedly symbolize the Eldar Empire's incomparably glorious history, as well as their technological and psychic skills far surpassing those of humans. At this moment, above a vast valley filled with black rocks and metal spikes, the tall figures of Rorschach and the others slowly emerged in the eerie mist that seemed to linger all year round. Welcome to Pleasure Canyon. This is the best place for us Dark Eldar to end ourselves, or to eliminate the weak. The Dark Eldar Utak, wearing only a pair of shorts, turned around and spoke eloquently to the crowd like a qualified tour guide. And at his feet, a Dark Eldar corpse, buried under countless bones, slightly widened its rotting eyes and became Utak's stepping stone to stand head and shoulders above the others. You're a group of disgusting, filthy aliens. At this moment, the tall chaplain Manu, driving his power armor, stood in front of the pale mortal mother and child. He stared at the smiling Dark Eldar with an unkind expression, squeezing out an icy sentence from between his serrated teeth. Oh dear, listen to what this lord is saying. We Dark Eldar have no choice. If the top of your human empire also had a soul-devouring, ravenous lady, would your lives be any better than ours? Oh, I just remembered, actually, the one sitting on your golden throne is not much different from the ravenous lady. They both want to devour. Thump, along with the low hum of a metal decimus suddenly tearing through the air. The Dark Eldar Utak, who had not finished speaking, was heavily knocked to the ground by the metal decimus. Pooh, he subconsciously widened his eyes and spat out scarlet blood and broken teeth from his mouth. He hurriedly moved his slender body, filled with pain, and kowtowed and knelt towards Rorschach's direction. Primarch, I was wrong. I was really wrong. It was just a small joke. Utok, put away your petty thoughts. Rorschach stared at the Dark Eldar, who didn't even dare to lift his head, with an icy gaze. He then turned to Warband leader Tiberius, who had always been silent, and said, "According to the way these aliens do things, the Cabal's Archon will definitely not come to trade as agreed. Tiberius, you lead the Lamenters to ambush them here. You don't need to eliminate too many aliens, just hold back some of the Cabal's combat power. If the situation is not good, prioritize survival and retreat. Pale Nomad, you lead the hunting squad and sneak into the Archon's palace with me. We'll go get the Void Glass ourselves. Chaplain Manu, your only task is to protect this mortal mother and child." Boom boom boom. Just as Rorschach's words fell, from the overlapping mists at the edge of Pleasure Canyon, the roaring engines of a large number of Eldar jet bikes and Reaver jet bikes could be faintly heard. Rorschach, reacting quickly, immediately drove his adamantium power armor and picked up Utok, who was curled up on the bone-covered ground. He casually put on his adamantium helmet. Then, he made eye contact with Warband leader Tiberius through the visor. Rorschach nodded heavily and then beckoned the chief librarian and the hunting squad to quickly run towards the hidden path of Pleasure Canyon. Buzz buzz buzz. Tiberius, whose huge lightning claws on his hands faintly emitted a low hum, shook his metal helmet left and right. He quickly raised a lightning claw and waved it gently. 5 Lamenter's Terminators, holding assault cannons and carrying a large amount of ammunition and supplies on their power packs, immediately found suitable positions and quietly waited for the arrival of the Dark Eldar. Dash 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 dash. Not long after, the hunting squad, having successfully left Pleasure Canyon, was secretly and quickly infiltrating towards the location of the Archon of the Twisted Rose under Utok's guidance. Along the way, Rorschach did not use the Blood Scythe or the Forge Heart. Instead, he used the unexpected and unavoidable nature of the Metal Decimus to carefully clear out all the Dark Eldar they encountered along the way. As the group gradually penetrated deeper into Comorig, the horrors of this dark city were slowly unfolding before everyone. In countless dark corners, betrayal and murder were everywhere, and mating and depravity were unashamed. Even more, a large number of alien races, used as consumables, were exploited and slaughtered. Humans, orcs, Tau, even savage Eldar or Craftworld Eldar were all playthings in the hands of the Dark Eldar. If it were normal times, Rorschach would have left these Dark Eldar with a huge and unforgettable surprise. Unfortunately, they currently have a more important mission objective. Everyone could only temporarily forget those cruel scenes in the back of their minds and carefully sneak towards the Archon's palace. After an unknown amount of time, the group, having traversed many areas, finally arrived at a spiral-shaped spire palace. And such ancient palaces were almost everywhere in the surrounding space. Primarch, we've finally arrived, it's here. But, if you don't mind, please listen to my advice. If you choose to let go and leave now, I can still guarantee your safety, but if you insist on entering, believe me, perhaps death is a relief. At this moment, Utok, with dried bloodstains on the corners of his mouth, earnestly persuaded Rorschach. Although his mouth, missing some teeth, spoke with a leak. He also rarely said some thought-provoking words. At that moment, Roa's gaze landed on Yuta's face through the lenses of his helmet. He hadn't expected a captured alien to utter words filled with such advice and goodwill. This was an extremely rare occurrence, especially coming from a Dark Eldar. Yuta, whether your advice is sincere or feigned, I said that as long as you don't betray us, after we retrieve the ancient artifact, I will spare your life. That has never changed. Roa, his voice low, shifted his gaze back to the spiral palace before him. Seeing that the Primarch's mind was made up, Yuta shook his head slightly and carefully guided the group to sneak towards the periphery of the palace. Soon after, Roa and the others entered the interior of the lavish palace, decorated in a style full of aristocratic flair, through a secret passage known only to a few trusted members of the Cabal. Continuing deeper in this direction will lead to the Archon's location, while this direction leads to his personal vault. Primarch, we can only gamble on luck now. Either the ancient artifact you seek has been placed in the personal vault, or it's still in the Archon's chambers. At this moment, Yuta, who was furtively crouching in the corner, turned his head and whispered to Roa behind him. Roa lowered his head and pondered for a moment. He unhesitatingly chose the path leading to the Archon's location. If the Archon's life was firmly in their hands, then a mere personal vault would be theirs to enter and exit as they pleased. Thump, 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 accompanied by the now undisguised heavy footsteps of the group. The hunting squad, quickly activating their power armor, immediately entered combat readiness. However, when the imposing group successfully traversed the labyrinthine palace corridors and arrived at the luxurious chamber of the Archon, they encountered no resistance from any Cabal warriors or the Archon himself. It was as if the entire Spiral Palace was deserted. I have a very ominous premonition, Yuta. Would you care to explain? Roa quickly scanned the empty room, where not even a hair could be seen, through his helmet's lenses. He abruptly turned his adamantium helmet, staring at Yuta, whose expression shifted from surprise to growing terror. Primarch, I believe there may have been a flaw in our plan, or rather, we shouldn't have revealed the news of your arrival to such a cunning Cabal Archon beforehand. Because similar conspiracies and schemes are as easy for a native-born Dark Eldar to unravel as eating or drinking, even to the point of formulating a new plan in response. By Aisha's grace, that old codger definitely saw through my little scheme the moment he heard the news. We are the ones who are the targets trapped in the jar. Just as Yuta's words, filled with despair, fell. Rumble, rumble, accompanied by the deafening roar of palace walls being forcibly smashed down. Cabal warriors clad in black Cabal armor, wielding splinter rifles or shredders, swiftly appeared from all directions around the hunting squad. Instantly, countless poison crystals, shimmering with malevolent light, and webs of monofilament, capable of easily severing flesh and blood, came crashing down on Roa and the others. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Reacting swiftly, Roa abruptly raised his hand and waved it. The metallic 10 rings, suspended in midair, immediately began to spin rapidly, and quickly expanded into a metallic helical barrier large enough to envelop everyone around them. At the same time, the chief librarian, the pale nomad, who abruptly activated his power armor and stepped forward, also suddenly erected a psychic barrier sufficient to withstand some of the firepower. Change of objective, follow me and fight our way out. Roa let out a low roar to the others behind him without turning his head. The next second, he casually grabbed the blood scythe and the forge heart from behind his power pack and from his waist. His entire towering frame charged head-on towards the enemy like a steel train. Crackle, crackle, the chief librarian, the pale nomad, with a ferocious expression, raised the force staff in his palm. Bolts of psychic lightning, powerful enough to annihilate ordinary Astartes, struck down at the Cabal warriors one after another with terrifying sounds. Immediately afterward, the bolters from the other Astartes of the hunting squad also swiftly unleashed a deafening roar. At this moment, Yuta, his face pale, silently squeezed together with the trembling mortal mother and child, and allowed the metallic giants, like steel barriers, to carry them forward in the charge. Shriek, shriek, shriek. As green light rose and fell, the blood scythe, tightly gripped in Roa's palm, swept across the surroundings continuously. Not a single Cabal warrior could withstand even a single exchange. They could only be forcibly chopped into scattered pieces of flesh and blood, along with their melee weapons. At the same time, the forge heart in Roa's other palm, its black muzzle, did not stop roaring for a moment. Blasts of scorching plasma gradually converged into terrifying tides, quickly clearing out the Cabal warriors surging forward. And as time passed, the fighting group actually managed to break through the encirclement of countless Dark Eldar and reach a passage not far from the palace exit. However, at this time, even more numerous Cabal warriors continued to pour into the palace entrance. Countless venomous crystals rained down on Roa and the others like a torrential downpour. Thus, Roa and the others had to change their direction of advance and quickly moved towards the location of the personal vault. That's a webway portal. At this moment, Roa, who had just relied on the sharpness of the blood scythe to forcibly cleave open the metal door of the personal vault, almost immediately saw the webway device located in the center of the vault. Yuta, where does this webway lead to? Roa took a deep breath, and he asked the Dark Eldar loudly behind him without hesitation. Primarch, I really don't know, but I don't think we have any other choice at the moment. If we are caught by the Archon, this traitor who sold information will definitely die more miserably than you. Yuta, his face pale, ran towards the webway device without even thinking. And with his rapidly changing complex hand gestures, a webway portal with a smooth, mirror-like surface slowly rotating was successfully activated. Everyone, come with me. Yuta has boarded the same ship as us, he won't choose to betray us in this desperate situation. At this moment, Roa, hearing more chaotic sounds coming from not far away, didn't have time to think any further, as a large number of enemy pursuers were already close at hand. So, he said softly to the hunting squad behind him without turning his head. Then, the others nodded heavily and immediately stepped into the depths of the webway portal and ran quickly. After experiencing an extremely brief sensory blackout, having successfully passed through the webway portal, Roach's magnetic boots heavily landed on a thick layer of soil thoroughly soaked in countless blood. Roar, roar, roar. Just then, before Roach could quickly observe the surrounding environment through his visor, a series of cheers and shouts from all directions completely flooded his ears. Hiss. At this moment, Roach, who had sucked in a cold breath, realized that he himself and the entire hunting team had actually arrived at the center of a large arena filled with Dark Eldar through the webway. Welcome, Astartes from the Imperium of Man. I am Rinu Lim, Archon of the Piercing Rose Cabal. In the next moment, on a luxurious grandstand located on the edge of the great arena, an Archon wearing dark green ghost armor slowly extended two slender arms forward, and the indifferent voice that covered the entire arena even gradually suppressed the howling of countless fanatical spectators. First of all, I would like to thank every Cabal for their strong support, and also thank your Archons for sending envoys to watch the battle. Secondly, I would also like to thank every Dark Eldar for their enthusiasm for this death arena. In my opinion, slaughter without an audience is meaningless. Astartes, I heard you want an ancient artifact in my possession. I have always been fair. If you can complete this bloody slaughter performance and successfully survive, then not only will I personally offer the ancient artifact, but I will also guarantee your safe departure from Comorig in the name of the Piercing Rose Cabal. Of course, there is one fellow among all of you who cannot leave no matter what, Utok. You treacherous and despicable pointy ear, tell him how we Comorig treat traitors. As soon as he finished speaking, Archon Rinu, his expression almost twisted, suddenly pointed a finger in Utok's direction. And the excited roars from countless Dark Eldar seemed to shake even the star, Black Sun, above the great arena slightly. Death by 1,000 cuts. Death by 1,000 cuts. Comma comma. Ding ding ding. Just then, purple glowing metal torques suddenly flew into the air. Immediately afterwards, the extremely ear-piercing sound of metal friction actually completely suppressed the terrifying shouts of countless Dark Eldar. You Dark Eldar talk too much nonsense. If you have any tricks, you might as well use them all at once. I don't think the Dark Eldar will keep their word. Roach, wearing a vibranium helmet, slightly raised his neck. He ignored Utok, who was almost trembling like a sieve beside him. Roach simply looked at Archon Rinu in the distance through his visor with an icy gaze, while his deep voice constantly penetrated the barrier of the helmet, slowly echoing in the sky above the great arena. Heh, I admire your courage, but I hope you will still have the guts to say these words soon. Archon Rinu chuckled slightly and suddenly raised a palm. With his slow movement, a tall stone pillar as thick as a bucket slowly rose from the edge of the great arena. And at the very top of the stone pillar, a crystal creation the size of a human head, covered in black holes, was clearly presented in front of everyone. The Void Glass. That is the Void Glass. The ancient artifact lost by Ascarcharodons. In the next second, standing behind the hunting team specifically to protect the mortal mother and son, Chaplain Manu, clutching a bolter in his palm, couldn't help but step forward and blurt out to Roach's tall figure. The responsibility for the failure of this operation lies with me, so, I will deal with all the enemies next. If there is a chance, find a way to seize the Void Glass and escape Comorig. Also, I hope Tiberius can notice the unexpected situation here and come to support us as soon as possible. At this moment, Roach, wearing a vibranium helmet, slowly put away the furnace heart. He activated the vibranium power armor and turned slightly, speaking in a low voice to Chief Librarian Pale Nomad standing behind him. Primarch, what are you talking about? We Carcharodons have no fear even when facing the Tyranid Hive fleets, let alone a group of pointy-eared aliens who have been hiding from chaos for years. Please rest assured, when necessary, I will use my life to open a portal for you, and at the same time give the Dark Eldar a great surprise. The only pity is that my soul may not be able to return to the side of the Void Father to serve. At this moment, Chief Librarian Pale Nomad, with a cold smile on the corner of his mouth, said to Roach without hesitation. Judging from the other party's words, this knowledgeable and powerful Chief Librarian is probably determined to die. Caw. In the next moment, accompanied by the harsh sound of a metal fence slowly rising, One by one, Eldar gladiators wielding melee weapons stepped onto the bloody ground of the great arena with ferocious expressions. Roach, who took a deep breath, did not talk to Pale Nomad any further. He carried the blood scythe in one hand, activated the vibranium power armor, and walked forward to meet them head-on. I announce, the death arena begins immediately. At the same time, with Archon Rinu's indifferent voice covering the entire arena once again. Roach, who swung the blood scythe with all his might, engaged in a fierce physical collision with the numerous Eldar gladiators. In an instant, countless pieces of flesh and blood flew everywhere. And every time an Eldar gladiator was completely torn apart by the blood scythe, Roach, almost covered in blood, would receive excited shouts from countless Dark Eldar. They don't care who the winner is. As long as it can cause more visual stimulation, what if the enemy wins? Soon after, when all the Eldar gladiators were easily wiped out by Roach, the metal fence that sounded again released 4 nightmare swordsmen wearing nightmare armor. And Roach, who was gradually entering a killing state, unhesitatingly activated the vibranium power armor and launched a fierce charge in the direction of the nightmare swordsman. Relying on the difficult-to-break armor shell on his body and the indestructible blood scythe in his palm. In just a few rounds, he brutally hacked these swordsmen with superb swordsmanship to death. Tisk tisk, it seems that you Astartes are not ordinary. Are you a company champion from some chapter? But it doesn't matter, the death arena has nothing else, but there are plenty of brave and ruthless gladiators. Let us all rise and warmly welcome a giant gladiator who also comes from the Monkey Empire, a rising star of slaughter in the Comorid Grand Arena. Blood Wolf. At this moment, the indifferent voice from Archon Rinu resounded throughout the arena once again. And as soon as the other party's voice fell, deep in the metal fence that suddenly opened at the edge of the great arena, a tall and burly figure slowly walked out. Roach quickly turned his head to look. I saw that the other party's 2 arms were completely bare, without any armor protection. The tall body was wearing a set of tattered black power armor covered with countless battle damage marks. Above the power pack with a servo-mechanical arm remaining, the exquisite heads belonging to the succubi of the witch cult were inserted with metal spikes respectively. A head of an orc boss that seemed to be roaring at the sky, and a tattered metal helmet that looked like a Chaos Astartes. Blood Wolf. Blood Wolf. At this moment, countless Dark Eldar with fanatical expressions stood above the great arena and let out almost crazy shouts. And Roach, who slowly clenched the blood scythe in his palm, frowned subconsciously. Once the tall figure's black magnetic boots heavily stepped onto the bloody soil of the great arena. Wearing a vibranium helmet, Loxia clearly saw a familiar face through the visor. Grayish-white long hair, cyan wolf eyes, and snow-white fangs protruding from his lips because of a cold smile. To actually meet myself, this is truly a great surprise. The Primarch Loxia, once again gripping the blood scythe tightly, muttered to himself. At this moment, amidst the countless frantic shouts of the Dark Eldar, the bare-armed wild wolf Loxia casually drew the sword of the vengeful goddess in a blood-soaked chain axe from the back of his power pack. Boom boom boom. The next second, accompanied by a terrifyingly heavy footstep sound, the wild wolf Loxia, his expression returning to an icy state, charged towards the Primarch Loxia without hesitation. And the Primarch Loxia, gripping the blood scythe tightly in both hands, also took a deep breath. He also activated his vibranium power armor, charging head-on towards the opponent. Rumble rumble. In an instant, the hard side of the blood scythe collided head-on with the side of the sword of the vengeful goddess. Along with waves of invisible shockwaves erupting towards the surroundings, the Primarch Loxia, wearing a vibranium helmet, roared in a deep voice at the wild wolf Loxia, who was close at hand. Did you fucking turn to chaos? Hearing the Primarch Loxia's question, the corners of wild wolf Loxia's mouth couldn't help but reveal a mocking, cold smile. He subconsciously bared the snow-white fangs in his mouth, and shouted loudly at the Primarch Loxia in front of him. Who are you cursing? If I had turned to chaos, would I still be trapped in the Comorid arena? Are the pointy ears here enough for me to kill? It's not me talking, but why would a Primarch like you enter such a dangerous place? And without bringing many men? Aren't you just courting death? However, just as countless Dark Eldar were anticipating a wonderful and bloody slaughter to unfold, both the Primarch Loxia and the wild wolf Loxia unexpectedly released the melee weapons they were using to wrestle against each other. Immediately afterwards, a large, bony hand and a vibranium-covered metal hand tightly clasped together. Hello, wolf cub, ha, Hello, Primarch. At this moment, with the sudden cessation of battle between the two, and their familiar attitude towards each other, every Dark Eldar who was stunned in place knew. The bloody slaughter they had originally anticipated was probably a complete failure. It seems I miscalculated, but it doesn't matter. All the spectators present, their lives now belong to you. Kill them, offer their heads, and you will become honored guests of the Twisted Rose Cabal. At this moment, Archon Rinu, with an indifferent expression, slowly stood up on the luxurious stand. He waved his hand sharply towards the crowd in the arena, announcing the fate of Loxia and the others. Roar, roar, roar. In an instant, the entire great arena completely boiled over. Countless Dark Eldar drew their melee weapons. They agilely climbed over the metal fences and towering stands, launching a frantic attack towards the interior of the arena. Come on, let's fight our way out. The Primarch Loxia turned his head and said in a deep voice to the Wild Wolf Loxia beside him. And the Wild Wolf Loxia, revealing a cold smile, also unhesitatingly gripped the melee weapon in his palm. Boom, 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 as the roar of the bolters in the hunting squad echoed around. The psychic lightning of the chief librarian Pale Nomad also continuously illuminated the slender bodies of countless Dark Eldar. Boom, boom, boom. The Primarch Loxia and the Wild Wolf Loxia suddenly changed direction. They activated their power armor in almost identical movements. Then, they launched an extremely cruel and bloody slaughter towards the Dark Eldar who were constantly surging up around them. At this moment, the chain axe and the sword of the vengeful goddess in the Wild Wolf Loxia's hand swept back and forth with force. Countless Dark Eldar were brutally cut in half at the waist by the terrifying melee attacks, becoming a part of the arena floor. And the blood scythe, tightly gripped in the Primarch Loxia's palm, was also swung into rounds of green glowing halos. Metal 10 rings, moving at will, also rapidly deprived the fragile lives of a large number of Dark Eldar. However, the number of Dark Eldar in the entire great arena was indeed too large. These almost crazy aliens had already forgotten where they were. They seemed to have only one thought, and that was to completely tear the human monkeys in front of them into pieces. Buzz, buzz, buzz. At this moment, Archon Rinu, who was on the luxurious stand, had just wanted to get up and jump into the arena, also joining this performance of hunting human monkeys. Accompanied by the extremely subtle sound of a power pack engine in the air. A tall figure, cloaked in a white hood and carrying a greatsword weapon on the back of his power pack, actually appeared silently behind the opponent. Heh, where do you think you're going? At this moment, Cypher Loxia, wielding a power greatsword, chuckled softly. He didn't wait for Archon Rinu, who had a look of shock on his face, to make any reaction. The power greatsword, which was suddenly swung up, had already unhesitatingly slashed across the opponent's neck and throat. You, and Archon Rinu, whose eyes widened in an instant, only uttered a short word from his squirming blood-red lips. His entire bloodless head slumped heavily towards the ground. You see, how simple things are, why make it so complicated? But there are also benefits, that is, the three people have finally met, this is not an easy thing. Muttering to himself, Cypher Loxia turned his head and glanced at the two conspicuous figures who were charging back and forth under the siege of countless Dark Eldar. He slowly took out a remote-controlled detonation device from the waist of his power armor. And pressed it down without any hesitation. Rumble, rumble. In an instant, accompanied by a roar like the trembling of the earth. The entire architectural structure of the great arena began to shake violently. And terrifying explosions, triggered by a large number of melta-bombs, swept continuously towards the interior of the arena. At this moment, many Dark Eldar seemed to have been completely blasted out of their frenzy by the scorching fire and shockwaves. Subsequently, they unhesitatingly began to flee towards the outer perimeter of the gradually collapsing arena. Buzz, buzz, buzz. A webway portal that suddenly appeared above the arena blocked the path of countless Dark Eldar. The next second, Chapter Master Tiberius, wielding 2 lightning claws, led 5 Lamentor's Terminators carrying heavy firepower, and quickly stepped onto the arena floor. At the same time, Primarch Roche, who had just stopped the slaughter, exchanged a glance with Wolf Roche. They clearly saw a tall figure wearing a white hood rapidly driving a power armor. It was passing through a large amount of exploding flames and collapsing buildings, running towards them. What, he's here too? Primarch Roche, wearing a Auramite helmet, took a deep breath. That guy's overall appearance looks very familiar. You were really busy before, huh? You even became Cypher. I don't want to run into those inner circle lunatics here. Wolf Roche squinted his eyes, sizing up the approaching strange figure. He made no attempt to hide his complaints to Primarch Roche. At this moment, the scene around them was becoming increasingly chaotic. Especially after Tyberos the Red Wake, chapter master of the Carcharodons, began his frenzied killing. Countless Dark Eldar fleeing for their lives were visibly decreasing in number. Primarch Roche didn't hesitate to issue orders to the hunting team through the communication channel. Pale nomads, get the solitaire prism, we're retreating. As soon as he finished speaking, Primarch Roche and Wolf Roche immediately rushed towards Cypher Roche. What's the evacuation plan? Don't tell me you didn't prepare anything. Primarch Roche shouted directly at Cypher Roche. Cypher Roche, his lips twitching, didn't waste any words. He reached out and fumbled in front of his ceramite chestplate. A webway beacon appeared out of thin air in his ceramite hand. Buzz buzz buzz, accompanying the faint sound suddenly emitted by the webway beacon. An incomparably wide webway portal appeared once again before everyone. Tyberos, pale nomads, quickly gather around me. Primarch Roche immediately issued a deafening roar to the Astartes who were fighting fiercely. Before long, Tyberos, covered head to toe in alien flesh and blood, and the hunting team, who had successfully seized the solitaire prism, successively arrived before the three of them. At this time, the massive Tyberos first carefully stared at Wolf Roche, whose appearance was almost identical to the Primarch, and then turned his gaze to Cypher Roche, who was wearing a hood and shrouded in mystery. Everyone, let's get out of here first. Comorig's defensive forces have already reacted. Just then, Cypher Roche suddenly turned his head. He stared at the sky shrouded by the black sun, in the distance, filled with countless rising Reaper gunships, and quickly said to everyone around him. Primarch Roche and the others didn't hesitate at all and began to step into the activating webway portal. After there were no more extra people around, Cypher Roche, taking a deep breath, stood before the webway portal, and he actually took out a remote detonator from his waist again. Now that I'm here, how could I not leave you pointy ears with something to remember me by? As soon as Cypher Roche finished speaking, he pressed the detonation switch without hesitation, and as explosions rose everywhere throughout Comorig, an ancient star, Black Sun, originally suspended in the sky above Comorig, actually slowly crashed down towards an unknown area of Comorig. Aha, the Black Sun has fallen. It seems that the melta bombs I scattered have worked again. Cypher Roche, grinning, took one last look at the approaching Reaper gunship squadron. He quickly stepped into the webway portal, his entire person gradually disappearing into the shimmering depths of the webway. Dash 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 dash. Near-Earth orbit of a garden world, Grey Shark, Gladius-class frigate. Now, more than a dozen hours had passed since everyone successfully escaped Comorig. And apart from a few Carcharodons in the hunting team being accidentally injured by the Dark Eldar's poison crystal weapons, no one was killed in the entire operation to seize the ancient artifact. This was not only due to the valiant fighting of Primarch Roche and Wolf Roche, but also probably due to Cypher Roche's careful preparation. In fact, he not only placed melta bombs everywhere in Comorig, but also used some Dark Eldar-specific communication methods to lead away the defense forces around the Great Arena in advance. Otherwise, once the Dark Eldar's subsequent support teams arrived, even if Primarch Roche and Wolf Roche could fight their way out, they would probably become the second Gene Sire in the history of the Imperium of Man to be captured by aliens. When I woke up from a coma due to serious injuries, I was already in Comorig. After several unsuccessful attempts to escape, I simply honed my combat skills in the arena, hoping that one day I could rely on my own strength to kill my way out. Inside a room on the upper level of the frigate, Wolf Roche, who was eating a lot, slowly said to Primarch Roche, who had his arms crossed, and Cypher Roche, who was sitting at the table, without even raising his head. To be honest, I am very pleasantly surprised to be able to meet you, because everyone is in different timelines. Primarch Roche, squinting his eyes, first stared at Wolf Roche. Then he looked at Cypher Roche. If Wolf was an accident, what's your situation? Primarch Roche asked him without any concealment. Since they were all himself, there was no need to be so polite. Tisk tisk, you, Primarch, really don't treat yourself like an outsider. We are you, it's true, but we are not you either. After all, our respective combat experiences are completely different, and our respective responsibilities are also different. Cypher, the Cypher Lord, who casually lifted his hood, reached out and took out two black metal objects that looked like bracelets from the stasis crystal. Then, he slid the two black bracelets across the table towards the other two. It is said that they are mysterious relics from the age of technology. They can transmit messages to a certain extent through the warp. If the Emperor protects, we can establish more connections. Although the Imperium has improved to a certain extent due to the existence of Lord Regent Guilliman, this is only a superficial phenomenon. In more battlefields, the Imperium's forces are steadily retreating, and many planets have completely become playthings in the hands of chaos. The three of us, and even other individuals who may exist in the future, need to work together to prevent the Imperium's situation from becoming even more corrupt. I need you to continue to fish out loyalists from the entire timeline, the more the better, and the productivity of the homeworld must also be doubled. And your battlefield is not here, but in the past. After a period of rest, you will take a trip with me. Someone is waiting for you. Cypher Roche, with a calm expression, looked at Primarch Roche and Wolf Roche respectively and continued. Wait, why do I feel like you know a lot of things? What exactly is your big plan? Primarch Roche, frowning slightly, stared straight at Cypher Roche and asked. Cypher Roche leaned his power armor against the metal chair. He spread his hands towards the other two versions of himself and said, I can do it, but I can't say it. Once I say it, that master planner might set up more problems for us and bring greater uncertainty. Oh, and there's one more important thing I need to let you know in advance, don't look at me with that kind of look. You, Wolf Cub, are not far from becoming a true chosen of Khorne. If one day you unfortunately fall completely, the rest of us will personally send you on your way. Of course, vice versa, if I unfortunately fall, you must also send me on my way. Let's get back to business. According to my personal experience and speculation, after the Great Rift opened, the Emperor is becoming more and more powerful, but the only remaining humanity is constantly decreasing. I hope you can be mentally prepared to truly become a tool. Aren't we tools now? Hearing Cypher Rock's words, the Wolf Primarch rolled his eyes and continued to swallow his food. Heh, I've said too much. Perhaps you will understand the true meaning of these words in the future. At this moment, Cypher Roche, as if possessed by an Eldar seer, shook his head and smiled like a wise man in control of the overall situation. Primarch Roche then raised a Auramite palm and slammed it heavily on the metal table in front of him, making a dull collision sound. If you weren't me, I would kill you, you mumbling riddle man. Alright, we should talk about the Solitaire Prism next. Within the frigid void, the Grey Shark, short sword class frigate slowly deployed its Geller field, encompassing the entire hull, and sailed into the quietly appearing warp entrance. While every mortal crew member and servant diligently maintained the ship's stable operation. Inside a concealed space within the upper deck, three versions of Rogel Dorn with varying expressions stood before a head-sized, seemingly faintly black-glossed emptiness loom. This thing is an ancient artifact. I don't see anything special about it. Wolf Rogel Dorn's brow twitched slightly. His snow-white fangs subconsciously bared. He turned to Primarch Rogel Dorn and asked with a questioning tone. According to Chief Librarian, the Pale Nomad, the emptiness loom won't react if it only comes into contact with ordinary Astartes. Only a mortal child with special bloodline or ability can barely activate the emptiness loom, and anyone within its range, regardless of race, will see their current soul essence through it. And if the three of us personally make contact, we might be able to find our own warp essence through the emptiness loom. It may not be useful now, but it may be of great value in the future. Primarch Rogel Dorn glanced at the other two, speaking with a calm tone. Judging from the current situation, Wolf and I have completed all the enhancement surgeries, which means our potential has actually been exhausted. In the future, we can only compensate for the lack of combat power through weapons, equipment, or combat skills. Oh, if we aren't afraid of low success rates, we can also gamble with Call's Primaris surgery. Cypher Rogel Dorn raised his hand and rubbed his chin. He squinted, staring at the emptiness loom within reach, and said cautiously. Oh, stop talking nonsense. Wouldn't we know everything if we tried it ourselves? However, at this moment, Wolf Rogel Dorn boldly reached out a large, bony hand towards the emptiness loom in front of him. Wait, in the next moment, before Primarch Rogel Dorn, whose eyes widened slightly, and Cypher Rogel Dorn, who shook his head and sighed, could stop him. Wolf Rogel Dorn's hand touched the emptiness loom. The souls and consciousness of the three seemed to be instantly projected into an extremely unfamiliar universe and space-time. Whoosh! At this moment, viewed from Primarch Rogel Dorn's perspective, he immediately discovered that Wolf Rogel Dorn, who was originally beside him, had completely transformed into a blurred wolf form of interwoven and fused golden flames in a crimson river, yet distinctly separated. Just as Primarch Rogel Dorn wanted to observe the other party more closely. On the terrifying wolf head that was slowly turning around, a pair of cyan wolf pupils, representing loyalty and rage respectively, suddenly stared in the direction of Primarch Rogel Dorn. A woo, accompanied by a deafening, ancient wolf howl. Primarch Rogel Dorn's perspective suddenly changed, instantly shifting to Cypher Rogel Dorn's position. At this moment, Cypher Rogel Dorn's tall figure had also disappeared. What appeared instead was a silver Ouroboros constantly biting its own tail, slowly rotating in a cycle. What was even more surprising was, on the massive body of this silver Ouroboros, conspicuous scales of purple or blue would continuously appear, and these differently colored scales would quickly stain the surrounding silver scales. However, when the entire silver Ouroboros successfully completed a rotation, those differently colored scales, which occupied at most 1/3 of the body, were instead recleaned, starting from scratch once again. Buzz buzz buzz, as the silver Ouroboros slowly opened its eyes, devoid of any emotional fluctuations. Primarch Rogel Dorn's observation perspective ascended once more, allowing him to clearly see his own warp essence. It was actually a brand new star standing in the depths of a void, and just recently born. Around this newborn star, 6 satellites of different colors, luster, and brightness were slowly rotating along their predetermined star system orbits. Among them, the purple satellite was the weakest, while the crimson and cyan satellites were the brightest. The black and dark blue satellites were slightly inferior, and the green satellite was slightly stronger than the purple satellite. Chur chur chur. Just as Primarch Rogel Dorn was trying to ponder what these things represented with his hazy and blurred soul consciousness. In a distant void space, a pitch-black raven soaring rapidly flew into the star system and plunged headfirst into the black satellite. Rumble. Along with the gravitational changes gradually occurring throughout the star system, the black satellite's size and brightness actually climbed again, quickly becoming the undisputed number 1 among the 6 satellites. The Raven King's gift, however, just as Primarch Rogel Dorn, whose thoughts were becoming increasingly slow, had just noticed some anomalies. His soul consciousness was quickly pulled back into his body by an irresistible force. Huff. In an instant, Primarch Rogel Dorn, who suddenly opened his eyes, couldn't help but exhale. Immediately afterward, he activated his adamantium power armor, and threw a punch with all his might towards Wolf Rogel Dorn, who was within reach. Bang! When the dull sound of vibrating air disappeared, Wolf Rogel Dorn, who had just been heavily struck by the adamantium fist, darkened his face. He instantly turned to Primarch Rogel Dorn, cursing in a low voice. "Are you fucking crazy? Heh heh, if you hadn't been meddling just now, would I have bothered you?" Primarch Rogel Dorn sneered. At this moment, Cypher Rogel Dorn, with his arms crossed, let out a sigh. He said indifferently to the 2 people standing beside him, "All right, let's have less conflict between us. If you're really angry, go to the training ground and have a fight, and we'll still be good brothers afterward. And you should have understood something from this special experience just now, right? You don't need to tell anyone, just know it yourselves. After all, that's each of your own paths, and others can't help. Things might be a little different on my end. Corvus Corax left something in the emptiness loom. I guess only I or other Primarchs can discover and activate it. If I'm not mistaken, my control over Shadow Step, or rather, the power of shadows, may be greatly enhanced." At this moment, Primarch Rogel Dorn, whose brow gradually relaxed, took a deep breath. Immediately afterward, he suddenly used Shadow Step to quietly appear behind Wolf Rogel Dorn and said calmly to everyone in front of him. Wolf Rogel Dorn, with a shiver throughout his body, merely bared his teeth with an unkind expression. But he didn't protest against Primarch Rogel Dorn's actions. Soon after, the Grey Shark class frigate successfully returned to the Void Fleet located in the Ghoul Stars. After Chapter Master Tyberos personally witnessed 3 versions of Rourke who looked almost identical, but whose auras and attitudes were completely different. He once again felt even more awe towards the existence of this 22nd Primarch. Especially now that the power of the shadow within Primarch Rourke's body had greatly increased. The Carcharodons, who were already descendants of the Raven Guard, felt a loyalty and love for Primarch Rourke almost equivalent to Corax himself walking among them. If the Carcharodons had previously hesitated about any orders from Primarch Rourke, considering some issues more from the perspective of the Imperium of Man, then now, even if Rourke said he would lead the entire Carcharodons chapter to betray the Imperium, the Carcharodons would unhesitatingly obey the orders of this new Gene Father. And this was the true extent of a Primarch's control over their Gene sons. Perhaps the Emperor had to choose this method with endless future troubles in order to accelerate the overall speed of the Great Crusade. But now it seems that there are both advantages and disadvantages. After all, even within the legions of those traitor Primarchs, there were many loyalists who could stubbornly resist this bloodline bond. With the retrieval of the ancient artifact, the Void Glass, the entire Carcharodon's Void Fleet began to bustle with activity again. They spent a long time wandering the borders of the Imperium, where the Astronomican's light barely reached, preventing or ending countless alien invasions. This also led to a huge amount of material consumption, even though Rourke regularly requisitioned a lot of supplies for the Carcharodons. The hunting habits developed over countless years also made it difficult for the Carcharodons to give up. As time passed, squads of Astartes embarked on necessary harvesting and exploration activities aboard frigates or assault boats. In fact, even though the Carcharodons had no planetary base and their behavior was not much better than space pirates, there were still many scattered human forces who would regularly pay them a portion of grey tithes, hoping to exchange them for more protection. And sometimes, just being able to show the terrifying name of the Carcharodons chapter would bring unexpected results. At the same time, the three Rourkes were also busy. Their first task was to get Wolf Rourke a more powerful suit of power armor to increase his combat effectiveness. Therefore, the Techmarines in the Carcharodons chapter obviously could not undertake this level of task. According to Primarch Rourke's idea, Wolf Rourke should return to his homeworld with him first. At least the productivity and foundries there would tailor new equipment for him. However, although Wolf Rourke's style of behavior was somewhat rough, he was actually very careful. He frankly explained to Primarch Rourke and Cypher Rourke that he had been watched by Khorne for a long time, and even a magic sword that he carried with him was difficult to discard. If he rashly entered his homeworld, it would probably bring no small trouble to the Emperor and even mortals. Primarch Rourke and Cypher Rourke agreed with this. Then, a flash of inspiration from Primarch Rourke stared at the two people standing beside him and revealed a smile. Instead of trying our luck in the current timeline, or looking for Forge worlds everywhere, why don't you join me on a prayer support mission? I think we will definitely encounter some Forge planets that can create master-crafted or even master-class power armor, right? Primarch Rourke said in a deep voice. You just want us to help you get more throne geld, but this is also a way, so let's find him a set of ordinary power armor to wear first. Cypher Rourke saw through Primarch Rourke's little trick at a glance, but he still selected a set of Dark Angel's power armor from the time crystal that stored a large amount of equipment and handed it to Wolf Rourke. Wolf Rourke did not hesitate much. He immediately found the Carcharodon's Techmarine and, with the others' help, put on the power armor. After the preparations were completed, Primarch Rourke took out a phase blade surrounded by green light from the simulator and gave it to Wolf Rourke. What about your Frostfang? Mine was destroyed long ago, lend it to me, I prefer to chop people with an axe. Wolf Rourke took the phase blade with a look of disgust. He casually carried it behind the power backpack, together with the vengeful lady. That's just a magic axe transformed into Frostfang, it's not even a power weapon, if you're not afraid of death, I might as well give it to you. Primarch Rourke stared at Wolf Rourke blankly and said lightly, even he himself shouldn't think about tricking any collectibles from him. It's good enough that you have a handy weapon to use, unlike me, I carry the lion's sword every day, even this power glaive was given to me by someone else. At this moment, Cypher Rourke, who was standing nearby, suddenly spoke. Only the tone was full of sighs. However, at this time, Primarch Rourke, who had just noticed the power glaive, frowned slightly. He narrowed his eyes and looked at it carefully before suddenly asking. That wouldn't be the White Tiger glaive, would it? Have you already met the Khan? Oh, good eyesight, I was wondering when you would find out. Cypher Rourke smiled slightly. He casually drew the White Tiger glaive from his waist and held it in front of him with both hands. Being able to meet the Khan in the Eldar Webway is a great fortune, but unfortunately, no matter how I persuade him, the Khan is unwilling to step out of the webway and return to the Imperium, and his sons only obey the Primarch's orders. However, since the Khan can give me the White Tiger glaive, then when the Imperium of Man once again encounters a real catastrophe, this Primarch weapon may become a token to bring him back. After listening to Cypher Rourke's words, Primarch Rourke, who nodded slightly, ignored Wolf Rourke's lip-pursing gesture. He took a deep breath and said slowly, I may vaguely understand what your responsibility is, first the Lion's Sword, then the White Tiger glaive. The responsibility on your shoulders is probably much heavier than mine. Therefore, I said that you should quickly become stronger and continue to develop your power. This matter ends here, we should do our job. Cypher Rourke casually retracted the White Tiger glaive, and without waiting for Wolf Rourke to ask, he immediately changed the subject. Soon after, inside an ancient hall inside the battle barge, specially used for summoning rituals, Primarch Rourke opened the simulator in front of the other two. Since all three could see the existence of the simulator, so Primarch Rourke listened to suggestions while looking for suitable prayer support. Finally, they did find a support mission that could directly descend on a Forge world. So, the three fully armed immediately tried to open the warp gate and launched a series of actions. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.